Chapter 147. Zhao Liu and Jing Jiu had always been the center of attention, and it was even more obvious that day. It was because many people had heard that Jing Jiu was going to challenge Tong Yin in the chess tournament. They looked at him with all kinds of emotions, some mocking him for overestimating his capabilities, some sympathizing with him, and some worried about him, and so on. If people's gazes could really emit light, Jing Jiu, who was stared at by so many people, would be particularly bright. Zhao Liu recalled what Jing Jiu had said before, which mentioned the sun. Under countless gazes, the four of them walked toward the deep part of the chessboard mountain. Sensei held Zhao Liu's hand and chatted with her. Zhao Liu had a cold temperament and would only reply once in a while, but Sensei was still very happy, chattering nonstop. Big Sister Cui of the Platonist sect explained to Jing Jiu apologetically, "My mistress seldom has a partner to talk to in the sect." Jing Jiu nodded and said, "We hit it off." Big Sister Cui smiled gratefully and asked concernedly, "Which pavilion are you going to choose?" "I don't understand what you mean," said Jing Jiu. Big Sister Cui was startled, wondering why Jing Jiu hadn't made some preparations in advance, or at least learned about the rules since he was going to challenge Tong Yin at the plum meeting. The rules of the chess tournament of the plum meeting were simple. The scattered pavilions in Aoyama were the venues for the chess tournament. The cultivation practitioners who had registered for the chess tournament could choose a pavilion at will and sit there, waiting for others to challenge them. Of course, they could also choose a pavilion that was already occupied and challenge their opponents. Since there would only be one winner in the chess tournament, it didn't matter how far they could go, and it didn't matter whether they were lucky or their opponents. Hearing their conversation, Zhao Liu asked, "What if someone is sitting in the pavilion and no one dares to challenge him?" Before and after each round, the host of the plum meeting will seal the pavilion to ensure that everyone has an opponent. Sensei smiled slyly and said, "Then pick the weakest guy and slowly drag it out until the end. Wouldn't that save a lot of energy?" If he really did that, he would indeed be able to play a few fewer rounds of chess. It was not against the rules, but it would be a little unsightly. Sister Cui said with a smile, "Playing chess is an elegant thing. There are masters and legendary seniors watching. Who can afford to lose face?" Sensei curled her lips and said, "If I don't take advantage of a situation, it's not gentlemanly, it's stupid." Choosing a pavilion in the chess tournament of the plum meeting was a matter of great importance. For example, cultivators who believed that their Tao hearts were firm would usually choose the pavilion closest to the waterfall. He himself was unaffected by the sound of the waterfall, but his opponent might not have the same mental fortitude. Regardless of what Sensei thought, playing chess was an elegant thing in the eyes of the majority of the cultivation practitioners and mortals, even more so than calligraphy, painting, and zither playing. When the cultivation practitioners who participated in the chess tournament chose a pavilion, they usually paid more attention to the environment of the pavilion, such as whether the shadows of the bamboos could be seen or whether they could hear the rustling of the pines. The chessboard mountain was protected by the formation, so it was not disturbed by the rain, snow, or frost. No matter how strong the wind was, it would turn into a gentle breeze when it entered the mountains. Amidst the gentle breeze and the chirping of the birds, the spectators could walk freely in the mountains and watch the chess games. There were no other restrictions except that they couldn't speak to disturb the chess games. They could even drink alcohol if they wanted to. It was like watching a winding stream. Which pavilion would Jing Jiu choose? Sensei and Sister Cui were curious, and so were those cultivation practitioners who were watching Jing Jiu from a distance. Zhao Liu thought that Jing Jiu would choose a pavilion where he could bask in the sun. Jing Jiu led the three of them through the sea of bamboos, the pine forest, and the waterfall. They met some people on the way. Some disciples of the sects who were on good terms with the Aoyama sect hurried to come forward and salute them, and some small sects in the south were even more respectful. Some sects who were on good terms with the Western Sea Sword School and the Kunlun sect cupped their hands casually, often accompanied by a cold snort. Those sects who were on good terms with the Zhongzhou school looked calm on the surface, But the way they looked at Jing Jiao and the others was a bit annoying because the mockery and ridicule in their eyes were too obvious. I'm not happy. Zhao Lei didn't show any emotion on her face, but her eyes were a bit cold. Why? Jing Jiao didn't understand why she was angry because of others' mockery and contempt. He believed that Zhao Lei was also a person like him, so he didn't understand why she was unhappy. Zhao Lei said, I know you can win, but I'm the only one who knows you can win. It's not a good feeling. Jing Jiao asked, Can you be more specific? Zhao Lei said after some thought, It's not walking in the night in luxurious clothes, and it's not something else either. I can't think of a suitable description. Sensei remarked gloomily. It looks like it's indeed a complicated emotion. Listening to the conversation, Big Sister Chui thought that the cultivation friends of the Aoyama sect were so focused on cultivation that they didn't understand anything else. It wasn't easy to win the chess tournament at the Plum meeting. Jing Jiao had to win at least 5 or 6 games if he wanted to meet her, let alone defeat that young Master Tong Yan. The question was, could he win? Jing Jiao had won first place in the chess tournament at the Four Seas Banquet, but how could the Four Seas Banquet be compared to the Plum meeting? In the eyes of many cultivation practitioners, the Four Seas Banquet was merely a clumsy imitation of the Plum meeting by the nouveau riche of the West Ocean. The truly powerful cultivation sects seldom took part in it. As for the results, the winners of the chess tournaments at the Four Seas Banquet couldn't even enter the top 30 at the Plum meeting. Big Sister Chui was worried that Jing Jiao didn't understand these things, so she wanted to remind him that there were many opponents he couldn't defeat at the Plum meeting besides Tong Yan. At the moment, they walked past a patch of wildflowers and came to a clearing among the cliffs, where a few pavilions were scattered. For some reason, there were very few people here, and it felt a bit deserted. Big Sister Chui introduced to Jing Jiao. Her name is Cain Yang, a disciple of the 3rd generation of the Mirror sect. She inherited the chess skills from Grand Scholar, he of the previous dynasty. A round-faced young woman stood in front of the pavilion. She had a quiet aura, and the freckles on her face made her look a bit cute. She bowed to Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei with a smile, saying, Greetings, senior masters. The Mirror sect had a good relationship with Mount Qing Zongshan, so Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei nodded to greet her. The 4 of them continued walking forward. A scholar was standing in front of the pavilion. The scholar wore an old robe that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. He was reading silently while shaking his head, though it was unclear if it was a script or a chess manual. Big Sister Chui said in a low voice, This is the disciple of Yamatsai, Shang Jiulo. His chess skills are very high, and he lost 3 chess pieces to Tong Yan at the last Plum meeting. Hearing the footsteps, the scholar lifted his head and said, I've chosen this pavilion. You two go somewhere else. His words were blunt. If his expression weren't a bit dull, it would be even more annoying. Sensei retorted unhappily. Why should we? We can challenge you two. The scholar glanced at Jing Jiao and said, If you want to lose and go back to Aoyama as soon as possible, it's up to you. That's right. A frivolous voice came from not far ahead. There was a pavilion in front of a big tree where the sunlight couldn't reach. It was very quiet. Chapter 148. Gu Yuanyuan's father was a general of the Northern Army. He was snatched away by the Windy Broadsword sect for some reason a few years ago, which caused a great disturbance. Big Sister Chui said in a low voice. It was said that the Master Broadsword King liked his chess skill and wanted him to represent the Windy Broadsword sect at the Plum meeting to win some fame. Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei were both surprised and interested to hear the name of the Windy Broadsword sect at the Plum meeting after finally hearing the name of the Windy Broadsword sect. The young man, named Gu Yuanyuan, had a proud expression on his face, which was totally different from the mysterious envoy who had gone to Aoyama to participate in the sword cleansing tournament. It seemed that Cain Yang of the Mirror sect, Shang Jiulo of Yamatsai, and Gu Yuanyuan of the Windy Broadsword sect were the most popular candidates for this year's chess tournament. In many people's eyes, their chess skills were much better than the so-called national chess players, and they might pose a slight threat to Tong Yan. The cultivation practitioners participating in the plum meeting didn't want to meet such strong chess players at the very beginning, which was why the forest was so deserted. What the scholar Yamatai and Gu Yuanyuan said made Sensei angry. What kind of people are they? Thinking of Tong Yan outside the old plum garden that day, Zhao Liu said, those who like playing chess have different minds. What she meant was that the chess players focused on winning and losing, so their way of thinking was different from the regular cultivation practitioners. But others might misunderstand her words. Sensei's eyes brightened, thinking that this big sister was indeed the peak master of Aoyama, and her words were so domineering. Hearing this, Shang Jiulo, Gu Yuanyuan, and the practitioners in the distance were all angry, and even Cain Yang of the Mirror sect couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. But what could they do? Jing Jiu didn't say anything, nor did he linger in the forest. He kept on walking forward. Seeing this, some practitioners shook their heads in disappointment, but the mocking expression on Gu Yuanyuan's face grew more obvious. A place in the mountain was covered with green trees, but they weren't so dense that they could block the scorching sun and let the sunlight pass through. A small stream ran through the forest, and the green grass by the stream looked like a carpet. It was a beautiful scene. Jingjiu stopped and said, the stream is very clear. Let's do it here. Sensei looked around and found that there was no pavilion nearby. She couldn't help but feel angry. I didn't ask you to pick the place for your spring outing. Which pavilion do you want to go to? Zhao Liu looked at the grass by the stream and wondered if they were really here to bask in the sun and sleep. Thank you, Jing Jiu said to senior sister Chui, even though he wasn't paying attention and didn't care about the experts participating in the chess tournament. Senior sister Chui smiled faintly. Sensei asked with some distrust, you remember everything? Jing Jiu said, I've memorized it. Zhao Liu thought that he was indeed good at deceiving young girls. There's another very powerful one. Sensei said very seriously, it hasn't appeared yet. I'll tell you when I see it. As time passed, more and more people gathered in the mountains. Although no one was talking loudly, it gradually became noisy. Many people noticed that Aoyama's sect had yet to show up. In an Ishiyama house, Yao Songzhan said hesitantly, Senior Master, though we seldom participated in the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting tournaments at the plum meeting, isn't young Senior Master here today? The disciples of Aoyama were all standing in the courtyard, waiting for Nan Wang's order. Nan Wang said, I don't know how to play chess, but I know it's useless to have more helpers. You people going to cheer for him is useless except to disturb his mind. Hearing this, the disciples of Aoyama felt helpless, thinking that they could still go and have a look even if it was the case. The result of the chess tournament today wasn't just about Jingjiu, nor was it about the Shinma Peak, but it was about the reputation of the entire Aoyama Sword sect. I know what you people are thinking. It's not too late to go when Jingjiu enters the final match. Walking to the stone steps, Nen Wang said while looking at the distant mountains, if he loses at the very beginning, why should we go and embarrass ourselves? The disciples felt even more helpless, wondering if Senior Master really thought that Jingjiu could defeat so many highly achieved chess players and come to Tong Yan's side in the end. Nan Wang knew what the disciples were thinking, saying, it's impossible. Do you think it's possible before he defeated Gu Han and broke Guan Nanshan's flying sword? Hearing this, the disciples were taken aback, thinking that it was indeed the case. They had developed an inexplicable confidence in Jingjiu. There was a slight commotion on the chessboard mountain, the discussions taking place. Countless gazes were fixed on a certain spot. Seeing the young woman on the mountain path, Gu Yuanyuan lost his previous indifference. He started talking to himself with an extremely nervous expression. Why is young Sister Dong here? Is she going to enter the pavilion as well? His nervousness stemmed from the fact that he hoped she would participate in the chess tournament of the plum meeting and have more chances to interact with her, but he didn't want her to be hurt by losing to him. That young woman was Guo Dong, the daughter of Shui Yununri, who had won first place in the zither tournament of the plum meeting. Jingjiu was looking at the water by the stream. Hearing the name in the discussions, He turned around and looked in that direction. Guodong's appearance was as ordinary as rumored, and there was nothing special in her eyes. Only her plump nose was eye-catching. But for some reason, this ordinary young woman made Jing Jiu stare at her for a long time, and he stared at her very seriously. Zhao Liu also looked in that direction, and then she remembered the zither music she had heard in the back mountain of the plum garden. The commotion started again in front of the chessboard mountain, and the discussions grew louder. It was because the people from the Zhongzhou school had arrived. The mountain wind ruffled the white veil, making the pretty face inside look even more vivid. Though there was no fragrance, many people seemed to smell it. Surrounded by her colleagues, the young woman walked slowly on the mountain path. Her figure and temperament were both very delicate, like the wisps of smoke. Seeing the scene, Sensei snorted lightly, but didn't say anything. She was the daughter of the sect master of the Platonist sect, and by Zhao was the daughter of the sect master of the Zhongzhou school. If others didn't like her, who knew what kind of trouble would ensue? Though she was still young, she knew how to behave in such a situation. Lo Huainan still didn't come. The fog moved slightly, and two figures appeared. Tong Yin and Xiang Wanchu walked onto the mountain path at the same time. As the main character of the chess tournament of the Plum meeting, he was the last one to arrive. Countless salutes broke out one after another. Different from the treatment given to Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu earlier, everyone was saluting Tong Yin this time, regardless of whether they were close to the Zhongzhou school or not. It wasn't a salute to the Zhongzhou school, but a salute to Tong Yin himself. Tong Yin's chess-playing skill was indescribably high, and he hadn't been defeated for many years. He had defeated the highly achieved swordsman of Zhaoga City in a row a few days ago, proving his unparalleled status. More importantly, he had entered the Dao through chess playing and then used the Dao to nurture the chess playing. As a result, he had pushed the chess playing level in Chaotian to an unprecedented level. Under the influence of Tong Yan's thoughts and playing style, the young famous chess players like Qu Wenyang of the Mirror Sect, Shang Jiulo of Yamatsai, and Gu Yuanyuan of the Windy Broadsword Sect had surpassed the national chess players and the predecessors in the cultivation circle in a few short years. It could be said that they could defeat their peers in any era. However, they could only follow in the footsteps of Tong Yin, even though they were so outstanding. In terms of chess playing, Tong Yin could definitely be regarded as one of the best chess players in the ancient and modern times, and a saint in chess playing. Most of the cultivation practitioners who came to the chessboard mountain that day were interested in and knowledgeable about chess playing. How could they not show the highest respect to such a figure? Tong Yin walked toward the top of the mountain. Countless gazes followed him. He walked past the sea of bamboos, the pine forest, and the wild flowers, and came to the empty space among the cliffs. There were 3 pavilions here, and 3 people stood in front of each pavilion. Besides Tong Yin and a certain someone, they were the 3 most powerful chess players in the world. "You've finally come." Shang Jiulo had put down the book in his hand a while ago. His eyes, looking at Tong Yin, were full of a rarely seen fervent emotion among the disciples of Yamatsai. In the last 2 Plum meetings, he had entered the top 4 once and the top 16 the other time, but he had been defeated by Tong Yin both times. He was the one who wanted to defeat Tong Yin the most at the Plum meeting, except for a certain someone. Tong Yin halted his steps and asked him, "Are you waiting for me?" Taking a deep breath, Shang Jiulo said, "Yes, I'll definitely defeat you this time." Tong Yin said, "Writing and drawing can be the best of the best, so the disciples of your house are good at it. But playing chess requires talent. How can you defeat me?" Chapter 149. If I could write more chapters every day, the chess battle would only take 2 or 3 days, and it would be wonderful. I said something similar when Nightfall wrote about Ning K's joining the devil. That was in 2012. I could write 5 chapters a day after joining the devil, so it was okay. But I can't do it now. I'm lazy, and I'm also busy. I have to go back to Hubei at the beginning of next month, so I need to prepare some chapters. It's annoying for everyone to keep up with me, so I might as well save some time to read them. I seldom explained or suggested this before. When I wrote Nightfall, I thought I was great, but I was upset because I didn't update enough chapters, so I wanted to prove that I was great. Now I still think I'm great, but I just want you to be happy, and I recommend The Age of Innocence in the Countercurrent. Tong Yan's expression was calm when she said this, and her tone was normal. But it was extremely mean and full of mockery, because it was almost disregard. The expression on Shang Jiuluo's face changed abruptly, and his face turned red, but he couldn't say a word. It was because he had to admit that his talent was far inferior to Tong Yan's. An exaggerated laughter came from the tree. "Aha, Tong Yan, you are indeed as arrogant as rumored, looking down on everyone, but I like it very much." Gu Yuanyuan said with a smile, "I've studied all your chess records carefully. I admit that you're talented, but I'm not bad either. Shall we have a try later?" Tong Yan glanced at him and said, "The Broadsword King doesn't know how to play chess, and he expects you to change the impression that Northerners are barbaric and lack of intelligence. How unwise." Gu Yuanyuan was annoyed and said, "How can you say that? He doesn't know how to play chess, so how can he judge that you know how to play chess?" Tong Yin said this expressionlessly and continued to walk forward. Kane Yang squatted down slightly and bowed to him like a teacher. Tong Yin didn't stop and said, "I don't like to play chess with this northerner. Beat him." Kane Yang was very happy to hear this, because it was a great approval from Tong Yin. The freckles on the girl's face seemed to jump with joy, while Gu Yuanyuan's expression became extremely ugly. In the forest, Bai Zhao watched this scene in silence. Under the white veil, she shook her head imperceptibly. Xiang Wanshu followed Tong Yin, a bitter smile on his face. Although Zhongzhou School was the largest school in the world, many people thought so, at least the disciples of Zhongzhou School thought so. Senior brother's words and actions were a little too tough and direct. The old masters of Yamatai wouldn't care about these trivial things, but Gu Yuanyuan was taken away from the Northern Punitive Army by the Sword Sage himself. Not to mention that Senior Brother had directly said that Lord Saber Saint was unwise. If Lord Saber King is really angry, who knows if those teachers will take the opportunity to make trouble. I'm afraid that the marriage between you and Senior Sister Apprentice will be more obstructed. Tong Yin, there's something wrong with your state of mind today. You talk too much nonsense. I'm a little worried. A voice suddenly burst out in the valley. What followed was the smell of alcohol. The smell wasn't pungent, and even someone like Kane Yang, who hated alcohol the most, didn't find it unpleasant. Hearing the voice and smelling the smell of alcohol, Sensei was taken aback, and then her expression grew excited. She pulled on Jing Jiu's sleeve hastily. That truly formidable person is coming. The man coming out from the bushes was named Hejan. In the cultivation circle, he had a more famous title, the Second Person. "Why is he called by this name?" asked Zhao Leiyu. Sensei explained, "It's because he can win both the plum meeting and the tournament of Dao, and he can only win the second place." Zhao Leiyu asked with raised eyebrows, "Can he participate in the tournament of Dao?" Sensei sighed, "Sister Zhao, it looks like you don't chat much. I'm off topic again. Anyways, he is a special case. Let's get back to the plum meeting. He has participated in 3 plum meetings, and he won the second place in each chess tournament, the second place in the painting tournament, and the cultivation tournament. He can be considered a true talent who can do anything. Many female cultivation practitioners like him." Zhao Leiyu asked, "Since he is an all-rounder, why didn't he participate in the Zither tournament?" Sensei said, "I heard that he thinks playing Zither is something only women should do." Zhao Leiyu shook her head. She had no interest in this person anymore, but she was puzzled. Since he had won the second place in so many plum meetings, he must be very famous, but why hadn't she heard of his name? He is a free-traveling practitioner. It's said that he has dealings with those deviant sections. The young master of the mysterious dark sect is his good friend, so the masters have been suppressing his reputation in secret. Of course, he is still very famous. I'm surprised that you and Jing Jiu don't know him. Sensei didn't know what to say. Zhao Leiyu knew the young master of the mysterious dark sect. It was said that his talent in cultivation was even better than Lo Huainan's, and he was very famous in the cultivation circle. If she had heard of him, He must be really famous. Since he has dealings with the deviant sects, why are they still allowing him to participate in the plum meeting, or even the Tao competition? It's said that the elders of various sects care about his talent and don't want him to join the deviant sects, so they take good care of him. Sensei suddenly lowered her voice and said, "My mother said that it's because he doesn't belong to any sect. So many sects want to take him as a disciple. That's why they do this." Hearing this, Jingjiu thought this person named Dijon was not bad, and the title of second place was quite good, so he was wondering if he should take him as a disciple. He touched his wrist reflexively, and then remembered that he had already tied the sword rope to the hands of Xiao He, the little vixen of Ing City. Shui should have left that small village by now. He hoped that everything would go well, and he would come back as the same youth. Unlike his big brother, Dijon had a tall and sturdy figure. It seemed that he had been lying in the bushes the entire time. Otherwise, he would have been seen by others. He dusted off the grass on his clothes and walked to the front of Tong Yin with the alcohol jar in his hand. He looked her up and down, feeling suspicious. Tong Yin's attitude toward him was a bit different. "I thought you wouldn't come this time," she said. "Of course I'll come if there's something interesting to watch." Dijon smiled while looking at the stream in the distance. Jingjiu and the others were over there. Tong Yin glanced in that direction and said, "You and I are both arrogant disciples. It's just one more person, so it's not a big deal. I met a youth a few days ago who is the complete opposite of us arrogant disciples. I was inspired by him and made some progress." Dijon said with a serious expression, "I think I can defeat you now." "Really?" asked Tong Yin. Dijon said, "If you are still at the same level as you were last year in Shuangshan Town, then you don't stand a chance this year," said Tong Yin. Having said that, he continued walking up the mountain. Dijon kept up with him and said, "I won't believe you if you haven't played before." The trees were everywhere, and the sunlight shone on the stream. When Tong Yin passed by, he didn't look at Jingjiu and the others. Dijon stopped and cupped his hands in salute to them, asking seriously, "You are that person?" He didn't look at Jingjiu when he asked the question, but at Zhao Liu. It was obvious that he didn't care about Jingjiu, who had participated in the chess tournament, but he was curious about the legendary Zhao Liu. "What do you think?" asked Zhao Liu. Dijon raised the alcohol jar in his hand and raised his eyebrows. Zhao Liu shook her head. Dijon showed a bored expression. Sensei asked curiously, "Is this the rumored dragon bone wine that you brewed yourself?" "It's an old flood dragon, killed by the immortal of the previous generation. I was just lucky enough to pick up a few bones," Dijon said with a smile. "Besides, it's been soaked for so many years, and it's no longer useful. But it tastes good. Do you want to try it?" Sensei glanced at Big Sister Chui out of the corner of her eye. Dijon beamed and said, "Shall we go over there and have a chat?" Dijon took the little girl to the upstream of the stream to eat roasted fish and drink wine. Not everyone was as carefree as they were. People's attention was on Tong Yin, wondering which pavilion he would choose. Tong Yin stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out of the mountain with his hands behind his back. His clothes were fluttering in the wind. There was no pavilion there, just like the stream where Jingjiu was. The discussion on the chessboard mountain grew louder and louder. Tong Yin seemed to be ready to stand at the edge of the cliff until the chess tournament began. Nobody knew how long it would take. Zhao Liu suddenly said to Jingjiu, "Don't take out the chair." Jingjiu was about to take out the bamboo chair. He was surprised to hear that and asked, "You care about this too?" Zhao Liu said, "You are playing on behalf of Aoyama today, so you have to be careful." Chapter 150. The ringing of the bell meant that Zen Master, Duke of He, and other important figures had arrived on the chessboard mountain. Duke of He walked to the railing on the peak top and looked down at the green forest, seeming to be lost in thought. As the host of the plum meeting, he had nowhere to turn even though he had many thoughts, because Zen Master didn't show up. Zen Master was resting in the Three Purities temple halfway up the mountain. It was a bit strange that a highly achieved monk of the Buddhist sect was resting in a Taoist temple. But Duke of He knew that Zen Master didn't care about this, so he didn't say anything about it. Duke glanced at the royal palace in the distance and said to the official by his side, "Let's start then." The bell rang again, and the chess tournament of the plum meeting began. Innumerable cultivation practitioners on Green Mountain began to move toward the pavilions they had chosen earlier. Looking down from the peak top where Duke was, they looked like chess pieces moving on a chessboard, as if they were marching on a battlefield. The cultivation practitioners, regardless of whether they were standing in the same spots or walking, were all paying attention to the movements in a few places. Tong Yin received the most attention, and people wanted to know whom he would choose as his first opponent. Or would he choose an empty pavilion and wait for others to challenge him like he had done at the previous plum meetings? The movements of Hejan, Cain Yang, Gu Yuanyuan, Shang Jiuluo, and other highly achieved swordsmen were also being watched, and many gazes were fixed on Jing Jiu by the stream. Tong Yin stood by the cliff's edge alone, looking at the receding clouds in front of the mountain, still motionless. Hejan was roasting fish and drinking wine with a young girl upstream of the stream. Cain Yang, Shang Jiuluo, and Gu Yuanyuan all moved and walked into the pavilions they had chosen earlier. Seeing this, the expressions on some cultivation practitioners' faces changed slightly. If they didn't choose a chess pavilion in the end, they would be assigned to an empty pavilion by the host. It was conceivable that the pavilions of Cain Yang and the other two would be empty. Nobody expected to encounter such a strong opponent in the first round of the plum meeting. Playing chess was an elegant activity, and it would be impolite to run and chase each other on the mountain. However, those cultivation practitioners walked faster than before. They walked to another pavilion. It didn't take long for most of the cultivators participating in the chess tournament to sit in the pavilion. Someone noticed that Jing Jiu was still sitting on the grass by the stream. "Is he imitating Gongzi Tong Yin?" A cultivator mocked. "It's really ridiculous." Someone said, "Hejan didn't choose a pavilion either." "Who is Hejan?" The cultivator sneered. "Who is he?" The chess games in some pavilions had already begun. Outside the pavilion, someone was responsible for recording the chess records. It was said that they were there to preserve the information, but in fact, everybody knew that these chess records would be sent down the mountain continuously. Many nobles in Zhaoga City were waiting for these chess records that day, and they were willing to pay a high price for them. Since the imperial court couldn't stop them, it was a good idea to earn some money from them. There were also many pavilions where only one cultivator sat. Some of them were expressionless, and some of them were mumbling to themselves, hoping that Tong Yin wouldn't come here. Hejan came back and stood by Jing Jiu with a wine jar in his hand, asking, "Do you want to come?" "I don't drink wine," said Jing Jiu. Hejan said, "But you play chess." Jing Jiu shot him a glance. Hejan said, "If you want to beat Tong Yin, you have to get past me first." Jing Jiu understood what he meant by now. Zhao Lei and Big Sister Cui were startled. Looking at the half-roasted fish in her hand, Sensei thought she should throw it to the ground, but she felt it was a pity. She had never eaten such a delicious roasted fish. Hejan seemed to be the second best in the world when it came to roasting fish. Many people had noticed the commotion on this side and heard Hejan's challenge, feeling startled. Only then did they realize that Hejan hadn't chosen the chess pavilion because he had this idea. Would Jing Jiu accept it? "No, I have an appointment with someone," said Jing Jiu. Hejan didn't expect that he would be refused. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who?" Jing Jiu didn't answer his question. He left the brook and walked toward a certain place. There was an uproar. It wasn't because he refused Hejan's challenge, but because Tong Yin moved. Almost at the same time as Jing Jiu moved, Hejan, who had been standing on the cliff's edge for a long time, turned around and walked toward a certain place. Countless eyes followed Jing Jiu and Tong Yin. Even those cultivators that had started playing Go had instinctively stopped and looked over in that direction. People were getting more and more shocked. Even Hejan opened his mouth. It seemed that Jing Jiu and Tong Yin were walking toward the same place. Everyone's steps left a line in heaven and earth. As long as they were not parallel to each other, they would eventually meet. The place where they would meet was not by the cliff's edge or by the brook, but by the plum tree. It was a secluded place with dozens of exotic wild plum trees covering a low pavilion. It was hard to find it if one didn't pay attention to it. Hejan understood now. Everyone in the mountain had gradually understood. The most anticipated chess game at this year's plum meeting was of course the game between Jing Jiao and Tong Yin. In a sense, this game represented the competition between the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school, and it was another competition between the leaders of the orthodox cultivation sections. The emperor's sudden decision to watch the chess tournament was probably because he wanted to watch this game. In many people's eyes, Jing Jiao had to win a few games before he could meet Tong Yin, and then he would meet Tong Yin a few days later. That is, if he had the strength or luck. Who would have thought that they would meet each other as soon as the chess tournament began? It was not a coincidence. It turned out that they had never thought of going to another pavilion from the very beginning. What they were going to play was the first game. Standing on the peak top, the Duke of He was speechless as he looked at the scene below. He waved his hand and said, "Inform the royal palace as soon as possible." If the emperor couldn't see this game, he wouldn't have a good ending. Nan Wang led the disciples of the Aoyama sect to the outside of the Nishiyama house. Many disciples still had a surprised expression on their faces after hearing the news. Zen Master pulled back his gaze from the clay statue of the Taoist temple and asked the Taoist priest who came to report, "Who will play first?" The Taoist priest replied, "I was guessing who would play first when I left." The gentle breeze passed through the wild plum trees and entered the pavilion. It didn't have any fragrance, but it felt chilly. Tong Yin said, "You can understand what I mean. You're smart." Jing Jiao said, "It'll be easier this way." Tong Yin grabbed a few Go pieces and moved them to the top of the Go board, not letting go. Jing Jiao knew that this was guessing who would play first. His gaze fell on Tong Yan's hand. Countless gazes fell on Tong Yan's hand at the same time. But Zhao Liu was looking at Jing Jiao. She once again thought of what he had said. The sun was right there. How could one not see it? But when the true sun shone brightly and dazzlingly, who could really see it? Since the beginning of the night, I have often used the words beside the plum trees because I really like the song by Wang Lihong. Chapter 151. It was crowded outside the pavilion, and a few wild plums were trampled on, looking desolate. Many more people were on their way here. It was a bit chaotic on the chessboard mountain. Hejan had left the stream and came to the front of the pavilion. Sensei had been following him the whole time. "Aren't you going to play Go?" she asked curiously. "No," Hejan said while shaking his head. Under the circumstances, watching Go was more important than playing Go. Sensei asked concernedly, "Aren't you afraid of being disqualified? The law doesn't punish the masses." Hejan pointed to the two people in the pavilion and said, "Who would be in the mood to play Go after their performance?" This was the most anticipated game at the plum meeting. People had thought that this game would happen a few days later, or it wouldn't happen at all. Who knew that at a moment that no one would have expected, this match would begin like this? It was like the climax of a story that had just begun. It was truly exciting. The cultivation practitioners who came to watch the chess game had surrounded the pavilion in the shortest time possible. The participants of the chess game couldn't control their emotions any longer. Shang Jiolo was the first to leave the pavilion, followed by Gu Yuanyuan and Kane Yang, and then more and more participants walked out of the pavilion. Even those matches that had already started stopped. There was only one Go game on the entire chessboard mountain. Hearing the report from his subordinate, Duke of Yi said helplessly, "That's it then. The games that have started should be sealed. The rest of the matters can be discussed after the game is finished." The subordinate asked worriedly, "What if this game takes 3 days and 3 nights?" Duke of Yi said with a smile, "Given Tong Yan's level, it won't take her so long to defeat Jing Jiao. As long as Jing Jiao doesn't play those dirty tricks to stall for time, it'll be fine." I heard that the important figures of the Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect are all furious, the official said uncertainly. What if Jing Jiao really tries to stall for time? The Duke of Yi waved his hand and said, "No, Jing Jiao is the disciple of Zhenren Jingyang." The official thought that if Jing Jiao behaved like the immortal Jingyang, why would he participate in the plum meeting and compete with others in front of so many people? Guessing first in the chess tournament of the plum meeting was no different from guessing first in regular chess games. The only difference was that both sides were cultivators. They could use their spiritual senses to try to see the number of chess pieces in each other's hands. Of course, the other party could also use their divine sense to form a barrier. In the end, it all depended on whose divine sense was stronger. In a sense, this was another form of fairness. At the same time, it meant that the competition would begin before the game. Countless eyes fell on Tong Yan's hand. No one dared to let their divine senses land on that hand, because that was an extremely rude action, bordering on provocation. However, the crowd could sense a white flame in Tong Yan's hand, even from a distance of more than 100 feet. Those flames represented the pure and abundant Zhen Yuan, which should be the manifestation of the heavenly origin method of the Zhongzhou school, which had been cultivated to a high state. It was then that Jing Jiao said something unexpected. "Which stone do you want to use?" Upon hearing this, Tong Yin raised her eyebrows slowly, and the crowd became restless. "Are you sure you can see through even numbers? Isn't this a bit too arrogant?" Tong Yin didn't get angry, but the expression in his eyes while looking at Jing Jiao grew colder. "I'll use the white stone," he said. Choosing the white stone could be interpreted as his habit of striking later, or as a disdain and disregard for the opponent. Though the games had their own rules, many people thought it was more important to make the first move. 3 stones. Jing Jiao reported the number of chess pieces in his hands. There was no need to mention even numbers. The crowd became restless again, but soon calmed down. Tong Yin squinted at Jing Jiao without saying anything. Jing Jiao looked as usual, as if it was a matter of course. He picked up a black stone and put it on the board. 3. A sigh was heard outside the pavilion. It wasn't that there was something wrong with this move. This was the most common position for the first black stone. It was just that the audience was really looking forward to this game, hoping to see something special or some earth-shattering choice. Of course, people were also very clear that unless Jing Jiao directly put the stone on the Tianyuan or the corner, it was just an opening. How special could it be? With a light clap, Tong Yin directly picked up a white stone and put it on the board without thinking. Jing Jiao's response was also very fast, and the second black stone was put on the empty space in the upper left corner. Clap, clap, clap. It was quiet, and only the sound of the stone falling on the board could be heard. The game that countless people were watching began in this ordinary way. The speed at which the two placed their stones was neither fast nor slow, and every few seconds, a stone would be put down. The number of black and white stones on the board slowly increased. No one would be stupid enough to exclaim at this time, and no one would be stupid enough to start questioning at this time. The situation on the board was very ordinary, and the black and white stones were placed in very ordinary positions. Who could tell what was good and what was bad? But people still felt a little strange, because the beginning of this game was too ordinary. There were no surprises or surprises. The current situation was very simple. There was no killing, and no deep meaning could be seen. The game of Jing Jiao and Tong Yin was like two people standing opposite each other, each making moves, but they never slashed at each other with their swords or magic weapons. The most puzzling thing was that they didn't feel that the two were accumulating their sword momentum in Zhen Yuan, ready to make a big move later. Zhao Lei didn't know much about Go, so she didn't feel anything. Sensei knew something about Go, so she didn't understand. This chess game was too ordinary. It didn't match the reputation of Tong Yin and Jing Jiao at all. Some people in the distance started to talk in low voices. "What's going on? This level looks very ordinary. Is young Master Tong Yin holding back because he doesn't want to embarrass the Aoyama sect?" Nan Wang and the disciples of Aoyama had arrived at the chessboard mountain, but they didn't approach the pavilion, standing in the forest a little further away. Hearing those discussions, some disciples changed their expressions slightly, and they subconsciously forgot to look at Nan Wang. The disciples of Aoyama didn't know much about zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, so they didn't know whether those people's discussions were true or not. "A bunch of idiots," Nan Wang said. "If you don't understand Go and watch those who can." Those who came to the chessboard mountain that day were either young disciples who were going to participate in the chess game or teachers and colleagues who came to watch the game. They were all people who loved Go. If they didn't know how to play chess, then who was qualified to be called a chess player? Someone noticed something strange. Outside the pavilion, Shang Jiulo and Kane Yang looked at the Go board with a serious expression, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. They were much more nervous than if they were playing Go by themselves. Chapter 152. It was unclear when Bai Zhao came to the edge of the pavilion, standing in silence among his colleagues. The veil was tousled by the wind, exposing her delicate face. She furrowed her thin eyebrows, seeming to be worried. The other disciples of the Zhongzhou school weren't worried that Tong Yin would lose, so their countenances were quite calm. Only Xiang Wanshu was calculating the situation on the Go board. Guodong stood outside the crowd, not too far from Zhao Liu and the others. As everybody else was looking at the pavilion, she was looking at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu was aware that she was looking at her. Normally, she would look back at her, but she only looked at Jing Jiu at the moment. Sensei felt bored watching the game, so she handed the barbecued fish to Zhao Liu and said in a hushed voice, "Don't dislike it. It's really delicious." Zhao Liu shook her head. She seldom ate, no matter in Aoyama or outside. When Guodong saw this, a satisfied expression appeared on her face. Hejan suddenly yelled, "How can he make such a move? It doesn't make sense." The crowd looked at the pavilion in tandem, wondering who had made the wrong move. In the pavilion, Jing Jiu and Tong Yin were still looking at the Go board in silence, as if they hadn't heard what he said. It was Jing Jiu who had made that move. In many people's eyes, it was an ordinary and safe move, so they couldn't understand why Hejan reacted so strongly. Tong Yin had made her own move, as if she had placed a white Go piece casually. This move was also ordinary and safe. Unexpectedly, Hejan yelled again, "It's even more unreasonable." Many gazes fell on him. They didn't understand why this highly achieved Go player would react so strongly to two ordinary moves. It was then that Jing Jiu placed another black Go piece. Hejan stared at the chessboard, paying no attention to those who were looking at him. He said in surprise, "Can it be done like this?" Tong Yan's next white stone was placed somewhere else. Hejan couldn't control his emotions anymore and shouted, "Too ruthless! The two of you are too ruthless." His movements were loud, and his voice was even louder, sounding especially loud in the quiet chessboard mountain. Guodong withdrew her gaze from Zhao Liu, looked at him expressionlessly, and said, "Do you always talk so much?" Of course, it was not a good thing to have someone shouting beside you while you were playing chess. How could Hejan not understand this logic? It was just that after seeing such a chess game today, he really could not control himself. "All right, I won't say any more." He lifted the wine pot and took a big gulp. The rare dragon bone wine tasted so bitter in his mouth, because he was drinking to drown his sorrows. The suffocation here was not the suffocation of not being able to speak, but an indescribable feeling that made one depressed. Seeing Hejan's behavior and noticing the expressions on the faces of Kane Yang, Shang Jiulo, and Gu Yuanyuan, the onlookers had finally realized something. It turned out that the Go game in the pavilion was not as ordinary as they had thought it to be, and there were many shocking thunders hidden in it. Yet, it was hard for them to understand the Go game because of their low cultivation state. Having figured this out, the onlookers became excited again. They looked at the chessboard in the pavilion, hoping to find out the hidden wonders. However, no matter how serious they were and how much they pondered and deduced, they still couldn't see anything special. Wasn't this the most ordinary opening? In the Three Purities Temple, Zen Master was sitting cross-legged on the couch, his bare feet sticking out from under his frock, shaking incessantly, as if following a certain rhythm. His gaze fell on the chessboard in front of him. There were two jars on each side of the chessboard. The heather outside the window was blooming, and the smell was so strong that it almost smelled bad, even though it was obviously fragrant. Perhaps it was for this reason that he kept frowning. After a long while, he had finally finished his long contemplation. He picked up a black Go piece and put it on the chessboard. As he felt relieved and was about to get up, he noticed that the expression on that Taoist face was a bit off. "What's wrong?" The Taoist hesitated for a while before saying cautiously, "This move doesn't seem to be placed here." Upon hearing this, Zen Master was taken aback and looked at the chessboard again. On the top of the chessboard peak, an official asked Duke Jean with a smile, "State Duke, what do you think of this chess game?" Duke Jean shot him a glance and said, "What do I think? It's so complicated that I can't understand it." The official wasn't afraid, asking with a smile, "Who are you betting on then?" The plum meeting was a grand meeting for the cultivation practitioners, but it would also affect the secular world. To say nothing of the others, the gambling game of Xiaoga City must be closely related to it. Duke Jean patted on the official's back and said with a smile, "Do you think I'm stupid? I bet on Tongyin, of course. Though I won't win much, I'm sure I'll win." It was quiet at Taichung Temple. As a high-ranking official of the imperial court who received a high salary and was known for his honesty, Jing Shang had always been careful not to appear too diligent in government affairs. Yet, he had rarely stared at the tea in the teacup for a long time like he did today. In the end, he couldn't sit still any longer, so he walked out of the government office after informing the vice-chancellor. Seeing Jing Shang's back disappear on the long street, the discussions in the government office started. Jing Shang had a younger brother who was sent out of Xiaoga City at a young age, and no one knew where he went. The Jing family had kept this matter a secret, but there was no real secret in the officialdom. A few years ago, many people had vaguely known that the youngest son of the Jing family had joined a large cultivation sect. As the plum meeting was held this year, more gambling games were held in Xiaoga City. Seeing the name of Jing Jiao, some people naturally associated him with the youngest son of the Jing family. Who would have thought that his younger brother had become an immortal master of the sword sect of Aoyama? With such a background, who would be willing to be on duty? It's only this morning, and he is already retired. The cultivation practitioners have cut off their emotions, so they don't have much contact with their families in the mortal world, so they can't be of much help. Moreover, he is only a disciple of Aoyama, not an important figure. But the imperial court won't be too strict, and there are always benefits when the family members are still alive. Haven't you seen how popular the Zhao Manor House has become over the years? That's right. I went to visit Master Zhao during the New Year festival. Tut tut, the treasures in the manor house are piled up like a mountain. I heard that they were all sent from Nanhezu. Jing Shang had no idea what his colleagues were talking about him behind his back. Even if he knew, he wouldn't be in the mood to pay attention to it. The news spread very fast in Xiaoga City. It didn't take him long to hear what had happened on the chessboard mountain. When he learned that Jing Jiao's first opponent was Tong Yin, his head buzzed, and he almost passed out. There was no brotherly relationship between him and Jing Jiao. Even if Jing Jiao lost, it wouldn't affect his future, but as he thought of all this, his clothes were soaked in cold sweat, and he was in a trance. As he came back to his senses, he found that he had already arrived in front of the manor house of State Duke Cheng. The whole of Xiaoga City knew that State Duke Cheng was good at Go, and the highest and safest gambling game of the chess tournament of the plum meeting was held here. A caretaker noticed him and came up to him, saying, "Master, you've finally come. Please come in." Jing Shang took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Can I withdraw my bet now?" he asked in a low voice after a moment of hesitation. Chapter 153. The gambling games of the state, Duke Cheng Manor had all kinds of rules. Only those who were good at gambling would bet on the final winner of the chess tournament at the very beginning, and they usually bet on the order of the chess games. Jing Shang was a prudent person, so he did the same thing. He bet a large sum of money on the first game. He thought that Jing Jiao had won first place in the chess tournament at the Four Seas banquet last year, and he dared to say such a thing, so he must have a good chess skill. Even if he couldn't win the final game, it should be easy for him to win several games in a row. Unexpectedly, he encountered Tong Yin, who was unbeatable in the first game. The caretaker knew what had happened on the chessboard mountain and said sympathetically, "The result is not out yet. Don't worry, master." Jing Shang knew it was impossible to save the situation, so he calmed down a bit, cupped his hands, and walked into the State Duke Manor. The back garden of the State Duke Manor was full of people. Half of the prestigious princes and nobles in Xiaoga City were there. But they didn't stand in the front today. The ones standing in the front were the national chess players, pointing at the wall in front of them. The owner of the Chunxi chess house didn't even have the right to speak, so he could only smile on the side. A large chessboard was hung on the wall, next to which are the names of the two players and the odds. Judging from the handwriting, it should have been written not long ago. Jing Shang wasn't in the mood to read it. He stood at the back of the crowd, silently calculating how to sell off his family property. Since he was bound to lose, it was meaningless even if the odds for Jing Jiao were high. At this moment, the sounds of discussion in front of the garden attracted his attention. Why did this step end up here? Has anyone figured it out yet? Put it again. I think there is something wrong with that small star. Take 2 more steps back. Not enough. Take 10 steps back first. Let me think about it. Grand Scholar Gu got up and walked to the front of the large chessboard. He took down a dozen chess pieces and put them in a few different positions. He turned around and said to the crowd, "Do you understand now?" Though the participating princes and nobles knew how to play chess, their chess skills were ordinary, so they didn't understand what he meant. The dozen national chess players of Xiaoga City seemed to be thinking about something. A moment later, an old man said with a trembling voice, "So that's how it is." More and more national chess players understood Grand Scholar Guo's intention, and that was to say, they understood the ingenuity of that move. The exclamations of surprise rose one after another, incessantly praising the move. State Duke Chang said, "The Grand Scholar is still the best. He has even understood this move." Grand Scholar was said with a bitter smile, "I merely understood the intention of the two of them a few steps ahead of you. It's nothing impressive. I told you a long time ago that Tong Yan's Go skills and realm are unprecedented, and Jing Jiao's level is also far beyond yours and mine, but you didn't believe me. What about now?" By this time, he was convinced that his guess was correct. Tong Yan had not used her full strength in the chess game outside the Old Plum Garden that day. Under such circumstances, he could only admit defeat in the middle round. The gap between them was just too great. Jing Shang, who was standing at the back of the crowd, was stunned. Judging from what Grand Scholar was said, it meant that Jing Jiao and Tong Yan were acquainted with each other. How could it be possible? He picked up the hot towel from the tray held by the servant girl and wiped his face forcefully, and then looked at the large Go board on the wall. Yet, he felt dizzy after a few glances at it, and couldn't understand what was going on. In desperation, he reached out his hand and grabbed someone randomly, asking, "What's the situation now?" That person replied, "Who should I ask if you ask me?" Jing Shang asked, "Don't the previous national chess players have any opinions?" That person said, "Like you and me, they can't even understand the game, let alone know the outcome." Hearing this, someone said in a mocking tone, "Why do we need to know the outcome?" The scholar said that the immortal master Tong Yan's attainment in chess is the best in history. How could he lose? Jing Shang was a bit annoyed, saying, "You speak so confidently. Do you think you can understand the game?" On the chessboard mountain, as time passed, the wild plums had been trampled into dust, but nobody could understand the game in the pavilion. They had no choice but to look at those who could understand the game. Qin Yang bit her lip, thinking about a move she had made a while ago. It was unclear if she was too absorbed in thinking that she didn't even notice that she had bitten her lip. Shang Julo mumbled something soundlessly with his eyes closed and his lips trembling slightly. They had given up on the idea of winning or losing a long time ago. The reason they were still concentrating on the game and thinking hard was because they wanted to understand the game. Yet, it was very difficult to keep up with the thoughts of Jing Jiao and Tong Yan. By now, they could accurately judge the level of the chess skills of the two players. Gu Yuanyuan was as famous as Qin Yang and Shang Jiolo, but he was obviously a bit weaker. As a result, he was in the worst condition, his face pale and his whole body soaked in cold sweat. He felt this game was dreadful. The two players playing the game were so dreadful. Looking at him, Hejan shook his head sympathetically. He wanted to drink some wine, but found the flagon was empty. He couldn't help but feel depressed. The game in the pavilion had entered the middle stage. He could still keep up with Jing Jiao and Tong Yan's rhythm and understand their thoughts. It was also because of this that he knew clearly that if he were the one in the pavilion at this time, he would have already lost, no matter whether he played black or white. Looking at the two players in the pavilion again, he felt a crushing defeat, but also a great deal of admiration. Only 1 hour had passed since the game started. Jing, Jiao, and Tong Yin didn't play their go pieces very fast, but they didn't spend too much time on it, so the game went on smoothly. A breeze rose, rolling up a green leaf into the pavilion and falling on the go board. Jing, Jiao, and Tong Yin looked at the green leaf and then raised their heads. They looked at each other to confirm the look in their eyes, and then put the go pieces in their hands back into the small urns. The game paused. Tea was brought into the pavilion. Jing, Jiao, and Tong Yin stood by the railing with their teacups in their hands, looking at the distance outside the mountain, saying nothing. Seeing this scene, the people remained silent. The game continued. The wind rose again, stronger than before. The clouds came to the sky above Zhaoga City, blocking the sun. The mountain air grew colder. The atmosphere in the hall became even more tense. It was quiet. Nobody dared make a sound. The game had reached the middle stage, and the go pieces were getting closer and closer. Even those who didn't know how to play Go knew that the two sides would meet eventually. Tong Yin began his first long examination. He made a decision after 100 seconds. He grabbed the white Go piece with 3 fingers and reached toward the Go board clumsily. It was unclear whether it was a coincidence or heaven and earth had sensed the danger and lethal intent of this move. The clouds on the chessboard mountain suddenly twisted, and a flash of lightning appeared in the deep end of the clouds. The white Go piece landed on the Go board gently. There was a loud bang. Chapter 154. Boom! Gu Yuan, who was in a trance, was awakened by the thunder. His body trembled, and he almost fell down. He held onto the big tree beside him, panting in fear. The crowd was also startled by the sudden thunder. They all looked up at the sky and realized that it was drizzling when they felt their cheeks were wet. Zhao Lei stared at Jing Jiao in the pavilion, the black and white parts of her pupils clearly visible, the worry in her eyes evident. Jing Jiao started his first long examination. The white Go piece was 7 or 11, which was a move. How should he deal with it? The clouds in the sky grew thicker, and the mountain became gloomier. The wind became colder and stronger, and the rain became heavier. For some reason, the great formation of the chessboard mountain didn't play its full role. The crowd dispersed slightly, but it soon returned to its original state. The crowd was reluctant to leave, and they looked at the pavilion again. Jing Jiao was lost in thought while looking at the Go board. Tong Yin stood up again after putting down the white Go piece and walked to the railing. The sunlight illuminated his young face, which was full of confidence. Time went by, and the sky became gloomier. Jing Jiao moved. He picked up a Go piece and stretched it toward the Go board. Whether it was the angle between the 2 fingers or the angle of the arm, they were all perfect. He had learned all these details from the introductory Go book in Haizhou City. Perfection was inevitably a bit too square and boring, but it could ensure that no problems would arise. For example, the position of the black chess piece was exactly at the intersection of the 2 lines, without the slightest deviation. The black Go piece was placed on the Go board in silence. 3 or 9. A flash of lightning appeared in the distant sky as the clouds rolled. The thunder couldn't reach the mountain because it was too far away, but the lightning could. The lightning illuminated the chessboard mountain, but it became colder when it was reflected by the quiet black Go piece, like a flash of sword light. Hejan raised his eyebrows, his sleeves trembling slightly. Cain Yang looked at the black Go piece and covered her chest with her hands, feeling very sad, as if she had been stabbed by a sword. Shang Julo grunted, his face pale, and a trickle of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. In the 3 Purities Temple, Zen Master gazed at the 2 pieces that had just landed on the chessboard. After a long period of silence, he raised his head and gazed out the window. The chessboard mountain was shrouded in dark clouds outside the window. Too dangerous. Zen Master shook his head, no longer placing a piece on the chessboard. He gestured for the Taoist to do it. On the peak, sensing the change in the chi of heaven and earth, The Duke of E's expression changed several times. Then, he turned solemn and said in a low voice, "What did His Majesty say?" A subordinate official lowered his head and said, "I've just contacted the Imperial Palace. His Majesty has just finished a temporary court meeting and is preparing to come over." The Duke of E took a few more glances at the bottom of the peak and said with a frown, "I hope this game won't end so soon." Regardless of whether they expected it or not, the highly anticipated first game of Go at this year's Plum meeting had finally come to the second half, and the two sides had started to fight each other. Jingjio and Tong Yin didn't hesitate any longer. The black Go pieces and the white Go pieces landed on the chessboard steadily, or even forcefully, one after another, making crisp sounds. The crisp sounds didn't mean they were pleasing to the ears. Sometimes they can make people feel breathless, like a sword hacking on a rock or a magic treasure hitting on an iron gate. Countless sword wills seemed to be generated on the chessboard, and the lethal intent filled heaven and earth. Those who knew how to play Go would find it hard to breathe when they sensed it. Among the spectators outside the pavilion, Guyu and Yuan's Go playing skill was a bit weaker than that of Yijan and the other two, but it was still at a certain level. Moreover, he had been fighting alongside the Broadsword King in the Snowland in the north over the last few years, so he'd seen the truly dangerous and bloody battlefields. As such, his perception of the game was much stronger. In his eyes, the black Go pieces and the white Go pieces rotated at a high speed, turning into the armored vehicles in the Snowland and the soldiers of the Snowy Kingdom all over the mountains and fields. The hard accumulated ice was crushed, and the violent wind and snow were ignored. The soldiers and horses were neighing, and the wind was whistling. The lethal intent was everywhere, and death was everywhere. When he saw a hideous-looking monster of the Snowy Kingdom pouncing on him, he couldn't bear it any longer and passed out after letting out a scream. Cain Yang and Shang Julo were also in terrible condition. Their faces were pale, and blood could be seen at the corners of their lips. Their bodies were tottering, and it seemed that they would pass out at any moment. Hejan walked to the front of Cain Yang and Shang Julo, blocking their view. If he couldn't understand the game of Go like most of the spectators outside the pavilion, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, Cain Yang and the other two had a very high state, so they could understand a lot of the game of Go. Moreover, they had to keep up with the thinking speed of Jing Jio and Tong Yin, which consumed too much of their energy. Hejan himself had given up on the game of Go when Jing Jio and Tong Yin were resting. He looked at Jing Jio and Tong Yin in the pavilion with a grave and worried expression on his face. If one had to pay such a high price to understand the game of Go, what kind of pressure would the person who played the game of Go have to bear? The game of Go went on. Jing Jio and Tong Yin placed their Go pieces at the same speed as before, but it gave people a feeling that the pace of the game was speeding up. The wind in the mountain grew colder and fiercer, or it was because the clouds in the sky grew thicker and darker. It was the precursor of a rainstorm. The crushed plum blossoms on the ground were blown all over the place. The clouds were rolling restlessly, as if a black dragon was roaring among them. More thunders and lightning emerged from the depths of the dark clouds, displaying their power to heaven and earth. The rainwater suddenly became denser, pouring down on the mountain. The formation of the chessboard mountain had finally responded. A shapeless force was released from the depths of the cliff rocks, blocking most of the wind and rain outside. The rainwater was flowing along the shapeless dome, twisting and blurring the scenery outside. It was a miraculous scene, but nobody paid attention to it. They were all looking at the pavilion. The rainwater on the chessboard mountain had become lighter. The raindrops falling on the Go board looked like countless crystal and transparent dewdrops among the black and white Go pieces. The game of Go had entered the last stage, robbery. The robbery was the mystery of the changes of heaven and earth, and countless dangers were hidden in it. The clothes of the two were slightly wet, but they didn't seem to notice it. They were still watching the Go board attentively, extremely calm. The Go pieces fell on the Go board incessantly, making crisp pa, pa, pa sounds, which were followed by the continuous rumbling of thunders. Even the mountains would be shaken by it. The The constant flashes of lightning illuminated their faces very clearly. The skin on Tong Yan's face was very smooth. It was a little wet by the light rain, making her look even more tender, like a baby. But her eyes were full of the desire for victory and a strong will. Jingjiu was still as calm as before. His expression didn't change at all. Not even the slightest tremble appeared on his face. He looked like a perfect, white, jade statue. Others didn't think much of it, but Zhao Liu had been with him for so long that she could see his current mental state. His sleeves were trembling slightly. Back in the inherited sword competition, when he climbed the Shenma Peak, or when he faced Guhan and Guananshan at the sword trial of Aoyama last year, Jingjiu was always so calm and casual. It was different that day. Facing Tong Yan, Jingjiu displayed an unprecedented seriousness and concentration. The sound of the go pieces hitting the go board and the rumbling of thunders were so clear. However, the chessboard mountain was extremely quiet because the drizzle fell silently and because no one dared to make a sound. After a long time, the rainstorm finally stopped. The dark clouds gradually dispersed, and there was no more thunders. The sunlight illuminated the world again. The mountains that had just been washed by the rain were extremely clean, both the air and the sight. A rainbow appeared on the horizon. It was Tong Yan's turn to play the go pieces. He held a white go piece, looking at the go board in silence. Those who didn't understand the go game also had a very strong feeling. This white go piece should be the last move of today's go game. The victory depended on this white go piece. His slightly wet black hair was blown by the mountain wind. The go board was full of water. Chapter 155. On the peak top, the Duke of Yi leaned against the railing, his body leaning forward as much as he could, as if he wanted to see the scene in the pavilion more clearly. Seeing this scene, the official felt worried and hurried over to support him, but he saw the shocked and incredulous expression on his face. It seemed that the chess game had been decided, but who was the winner? In the Three Purities Temple, Zen Master stood in front of the doorsill, looking at the new mountain after the rain, a gratified smile on his face. Behind him, the Taoist priest had finished arranging the chess pieces, but he couldn't see the final position of the chess pieces. The atmosphere in the royal palace was a bit tense. The eunuchs were doing the final check on the royal sedan. It didn't take long to fly from the royal palace to the chessboard mountain, but it was too troublesome to prepare for the journey of the emperor. More troublesome was that the estuary of the lower reaches of the muddy river had suddenly collapsed last night, and the emperor had called for a temporary court meeting, which delayed the preparations. The gate of the palace hall was opened. Before the prime minister and the minister of works, who had been summoned to the royal palace in a hurry, came out, a bright yellow flash flashed in front of their eyes. The royal sedan, hovering half a foot above the ground, sank slightly. The eunuchs knew that the emperor was already seated, so they felt relieved and were ready to depart. In their impression, the chess games between highly achieved chess players usually took a long time, so they should be able to arrive at the chessboard mountain in time. A commotion suddenly occurred at the distant gate of the palace hall. A eunuch ran over with a trail of light, smoke at his feet, and knelt down in front of the royal sedan, saying something in a low voice. A meaningful laugh came out from the royal sedan, followed by a crisp voice. Now that the winner has been decided, let's go to the royal concubine palace. There had been 4 royal concubines in the royal palace. 2 of them had reached the end of their lifespans and were sleeping in the East Hill. The third one was very old and seldom appeared in public. Speaking of the royal concubines, it was none other than royal concubine who was favored by the emperor. Royal concubine who had already dressed herself up and was waiting for the order to depart. The emperor didn't forget what he had promised her. After deciding to go to the chessboard mountain to watch the chess game, he sent someone to inform her. Such favor was rare in the royal palace, but she didn't show any complacency on her face. Instead, she looked a bit anxious. It was she who persuaded the emperor to go to the plum meeting to watch the chess matches, because she wanted to see Jingjiu humiliated by Tong Yan or other highly achieved chess players. Things developed better than she had imagined. Jing Jiu met Tong Yin at the beginning. What happened next was beyond her imagination. She kept walking in front of the window. She was not in the mood to look at the crabapple flowers outside the window. She said to herself, "What's going on? Why haven't we lost yet?" Somehow, she didn't want to go to the chessboard mountain anymore. A palace maid hurried in and said, "His Majesty is about to arrive." Royal concubine, who was taken aback slightly, asking, "Aren't we going to the chessboard mountain?" The palace maid looked at her hesitantly and said, "That game of chess is over." Royal concubine, who was famous for her naivety and straightforwardness, but she was also very smart. She could guess the result as soon as she saw the expression on the face of the palace servant girl. How could it be possible? She yelled in surprise. Tong Yan's white chess piece did not land on the chessboard in the end. Instead, it was gently placed back into the urn. The outcome had been decided. It was deathly quiet. The sound of the rainwater dripping down from the eaves of the pavilion was breathtaking. Buzz! The crowd burst into an uproar. It was not the sound of discussion. It was because they didn't know what to say or how to comment on the game and the final result. Those sounds were all interjections or onomatopoeia. Tong Yin was considered the best chess player in the world. In the eyes of many people, including Grand Scholar Gua, he was the best chess player since ancient times. Yet, he lost to Jing Jiu that day. Who wouldn't be shocked? Looking at the two in the pavilion, Zhan had a complicated emotion. Then, he restrained his emotions and bowed to them with a solemn expression. Cain Yang and Shang Julo bowed to him as well. About half of the people present bowed to the seemingly ordinary pavilion. They were expressing their respect and gratitude. They thanked Jing Jiu and Tong Yin for playing this game of chess. Gu Yuan had finally woken up. Looking around, he asked in bewilderment, "Is the result out? Who won?" Before the others could answer, he shook his head and murmured, "Who can beat them?" Though he was in a trance at the moment, he had a certain idea in his mind. The likes of Jing Jiu and Tong Yin were undefeatable on the Go board. Tong Yan's tender face was devoid of any expression, looking rather numb. It was hard to tell what he was feeling at the moment. Jing Jiu was still as calm as ever, as if he didn't take this matter seriously. Noticing these details, Bai Zhao revealed a strange expression in his eyes. Then, he found unexpectedly that Guodong had already left. The disciples of the Zhongzhou school by Bai Zhao's side were quite disappointed. They had never thought that big brother Tong Yin would lose. However, the result on the Go board was obvious, and his big brother had already put down the white Go piece. There was no excuse, no other reason. He had lost. Xiang Wanshu was the most upset. Nominally, he was Tong Yan's young brother, but in fact he was taught by Tong Yin in both cultivation and Go playing. He couldn't accept the fact that his big brother had lost. He remembered what had happened in Haizhou a year ago. At the Four Seas banquet, he had said a few words, and the young girl with the conical hat had retorted, "Why did such a game of Go happen?" It must have started from that moment. Thinking of this, he felt sorry for what had happened, feeling even sadder. He looked in a certain direction reflexively. Zhao Lei was standing there. Her line of sight fell on the pavilion. Xiang Wanshu knew that she must be looking at Jing Jiu. Her temples were a bit wet, and she was smiling slightly. The pear blossom in the rain was pitiable. How could anyone not like her when she had a faint smile? Xiang Wanshu saw admiration and intimacy on her face. He felt even sadder. Besides Zhao Lei, many people were looking at Jing Jiu. He sat in silence, his expression indifferent. His wet black hair looked a bit messy, but it added a kind of beauty to his appearance, as if he were a fairy. The crowd had a feeling. He was sitting here, but he was not in the mortal world. Tong Yin got up and walked to the railing. He looked at the scenery outside the mountain. Silence. Then, he closed his eyes slowly and raised his head. Closing his eyes didn't mean that he was arrogant. His eyebrows were a bit sparse. The raindrops dripped down slowly, sliding down the corners of his eyes and his pale and tender face. The crowd moved their gazes away from Jing Jiu and looked at the back of Tong Yin in silence. Tong Yin had lost, but he had played a game of Go that could change the world. He deserved everyone's respect. The crowd was waiting to hear what he would say. The Go game that day was destined to be the most famous and legendary Go game in history. At the moment, every word and action of him and Jing Jiao would be recorded. After a long while, Tong Yin finally opened his mouth. He didn't turn around, nor did he open his eyes. The words came out from his lips without any inflection, but they were indescribably stiff. Having played such a game of Go, I have no regrets in my life. What else can I be dissatisfied with? Hearing this, the crowd felt a great deal of admiration. He was indeed the young Master Tong Yin. His demeanor and breadth of mind were both admirable, and his love and respect for the Go game were still admirable. Yet, the crowd didn't expect what Tong Yin wanted to say next. But how can I be satisfied? Tong Yin's voice started to tremble imperceptibly. It contained the pain that he had suppressed with a great deal of willpower. This was the real pain. I've still lost. As I wrote this, I thought of the 5-set Wimbledon match between Federer and Nadal. Yes, it was great, but he had lost. Of course it was painful, and he had to cry bitterly. Chapter 156. It was quiet on the chessboard mountain. Nobody said anything after Tong Yin said this. It was true that one's respectability and demeanor were important, but the result was the most important. Tong Yin opened his eyes and turned to Jing Jiao, saying, "It's not that I haven't lost before. When I first learned how to play Go, I lost a master's wife 17 games in a row, but I don't want to lose to you." Hearing this, the others didn't feel anything, thinking that Tong Yin was talking about the competition for the limelight among the geniuses. Yet, Xiang Wanshu was startled. He knew that his big brother's temperament was aloof and proud, and he didn't even like or want to get close to his big brother Lo Huainan. Yet, his big brother was an elegant person when it came to playing Go. No matter who his opponent was, he wouldn't hesitate to praise his opponent as long as his opponent played well. He would also show more respect to the true Go masters like Grand Scholar Gua and Yijan. Why did his big brother say such a thing after losing to Jing Jiao? After what happened today, do you still think Go is just a game? Asked Tong Yin while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes. As the Go pieces were placed, thunder boomed, and heaven and earth responded. How could such a Go game be just a game? Jing Jiao said after some thought. Yes, I still think this is a game. Tong Yin opened his eyes wide, bloodshot. That's the essence. I'm not belittling it. It's because the game itself is meaningful. Jing Jiao said, going through the process and ushering in the result is different. Maybe our lives and the world are all games. Everything is a game? Asked Tong Yin while staring into his eyes. Have you ever risked your life for anything in your life? Jing Jiao didn't say anything. He hadn't risked his life for anything even in his previous life, to say nothing of this life. You are indifferent to this world and everything, and you keep your distance. This is why I don't like you and don't want to lose to you. Tong Yin said sharply, but I'm different. I'm willing to sacrifice everything for many things. For example, the black and white world. Jing Jiao looked at him in silence, waiting for the rest of the story. Chess is my Tao. In the previous game, I thought that it was almost perfect, but I still lost. Moreover, I lost to someone like you who doesn't like chess and has no feelings for it. I don't understand how someone like you could reach such a level. If the great path really exists on the chessboard, why did it allow such a thing to happen? What do you want me and the people outside to think? This isn't fair. This will make everything meaningless. Tong Yan's eyes were a little sad. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao said, "The world has always been unfair. No matter how much you and I love this world, it doesn't mean anything to the world. We are humans who are good at comforting ourselves with beautiful words and definitions, and this is how the world is." Zhao Liu remembered what he had said that night after they left the old plum garden. She suddenly felt a little cold. The people outside the pavilion also seemed to feel the chill after the rain. There was dead silence, and the atmosphere was inexplicably gloomy. "No, I don't believe it," Tong Yin muttered. "Everything should have meaning, and it must have meaning." He simply couldn't accept Jing Jiao's words. He had studied the Tao of chess since he was young, and under the guidance of his teachers at Zhongzhou School, he gradually reached a deeper level and cultivated the Tao of chess. The chessboard was divided into black and white, yin and yang alternating. It seemed mysterious and unpredictable, but there was actually a pattern to it, and he wanted to find that pattern. This was his lifelong pursuit. All things have a Tao, but many cannot be described as great paths, Jing Jiao continued. For example, in my view, the four arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting cannot approach the great path, because they are too simple. Hearing this, the crowd was in an uproar. It was universally acknowledged that the game of chess was the most complex and profound. Who would dare to say that it was simple? The crowd wanted to refute him, but then remembered the previous game and fell silent again. Jing Jiao was the only person in the world who said that chess was simple and no one was qualified to refute him, unless you could win against him on the chessboard. I haven't played chess before, but I've played a similar game before. After playing with you today, I feel that the two games have something in common. Having said this, Jing Jiao slapped the table lightly. The chessboard was shaken and jumped up slightly. Hundreds of Go pieces flew up from the chessboard and the urns, hovering in the air in silence. The black and white Go pieces were arranged in a disorderly manner, intersecting horizontally and vertically, and many of them were arranged vertically, forming a three-dimensional Go game. This scene was quite amazing, but it was not too difficult for a cultivation practitioner to achieve. Many people were taken aback, wondering why Jing Jiao had created such a strange thing. Some people had figured out his intention and were shocked speechless, wondering if it was possible to play like this. King Yang looked at the Go pieces in the air in a daze, feeling helpless. Hejan furrowed his eyebrows tightly, thinking that it was because there were not enough Go pieces. If there were 19 lines in all 3 columns, how complicated would this Go game be? Looking at the cage-like thing made of black and white Go pieces, Tong Yin said after a long moment of silence, "It's not something a human can achieve." Jing Jiao said, "It's indeed very difficult, and I can't do it now." But cultivation means doing things that a human can't do. Tong Yin said, "It'll be very tiring, just like how you are now." "Yes," said Jing Jiao. "I haven't been as tired as I am today for many years." He said this quite earnestly. Tong Yin said, "I won't feel relieved because of this. I'm just worried that you might lose if you continue playing Go. I don't like it when someone who has defeated me loses to someone else." "Don't worry," said Jing Jiao. "I'm indeed a bit tired, so I'm not going to continue." Upon hearing this, Tong Yin was somewhat puzzled, and the people outside the pavilion were even more surprised. Jing Jiao had already defeated Tong Yin, so who on the chessboard mountain could be his match today? Even if the previous game of Go had consumed too much of his mental energy, he would be fine after a short rest. Who would dare to force him to play in front of so many people? "The game of Go between you and me started in Haizhou," said Jing Jiao. Tong Yin understood what Jing Jiao meant, and so did everyone else present. Upon hearing this, both Zhao Liu and Xiang Wanshu recalled the scene at that time. At the Four Seas banquet, Jing Jiao won first place in Go, but he attracted a lot of criticism. Xiang Wanshu said with a smile that he would be beaten by his big brother if he played Go like Jing Jiao, but Zhao Liu heard him, which led to the following conversation. "That's right. I want to tell him that playing Go is not so simple. Believe me, playing Go is the simplest thing in the world for him." "Really? I hope I'll have a chance to learn from him later." "You can't do it. Let your big brother do it." Then, Jing Jiao said at the sword trial of Aoyama, "I have an appointment with the Zhongzhou School to play Go with Tong Yin at the Plum meeting next year. I have never said that I want to win the chess tournament at the Plum meeting. I just want to play Go with you. Now, the game is over." Jing Jiao walked out of the pavilion and led Zhao Liu down the mountain. The Go pieces in the air fell down like raindrops. Chapter 157. After Jing Jiao left, Tong Yin left as well. The chess tournament of the Plum meeting had just begun, so it couldn't end there. The winner of the chess tournament would receive the blessing of Zen Master along with the winners of the other 4 tournaments, and it was a great honor to begin with. However, for understandable reasons, Both the true chess experts and the simple hobbyists had little interest in the game and were unable to muster up any spirit. "I'm going to leave too." Hijan tied the alcohol jar to his waist and said to Sensei, "I'll go to the Platonist sect to play with you when I have the chance. I'll take you to the neighboring Ozawa to catch fish. The fish heads, they're very delicious when stewed, better than roasted fish." Sensei didn't pay attention to the latter part of his statement, asking in surprise, "You don't want to play chess anymore?" "Yes." Hijan fell silent for a while before saying, "I won't play chess anymore." Upon hearing this, many shocked and puzzled gazes fell on him. Jingjiu and Tong Yin had already left, so Hijan was the most popular candidate for the chess tournament of the plum meeting. Even if he was shocked by the previous chess game, or he didn't want to take advantage of it, why did he say that he wouldn't play chess anymore? It was unclear if what Hijan said next was to answer Sensei or to all the people on the chessboard mountain. "I can't beat those two even if I play chess for the rest of my life, and I can't even touch the hem of their clothes. So why should I play chess again?" Jingjiu and Zhao Liu parted at Zinjiku, just like a few days ago. Everything was normal, as if nothing had happened that day. The eaves of Taichung Temple looked shiny after being washed by the rainwater, looking like the horns of an old dragon. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and walked up the stone steps, pushing open the door and entering the temple. The whole family was sitting in the living room. Seeing him come in, they all stood up. "Why are you back so soon?" The attitude of the eldest brother of the Jing family was more respectful than a few days ago, but his eyes were full of joy. When Jingjiu saw him, he realized that he had forgotten something. A few days ago, when he had asked the other party to bet on chess, he had said that he would win. Today, he had only played one round before returning. He said, "How much did you lose? I will compensate you." The elder brother of the Jing family said happily, "It's okay, I bet on a single win." The rain stopped when they reached the chessboard mountain. There was no sound outside the window. It was very quiet, suitable for sleeping. Jingjiu didn't fall asleep. He was thinking about something. The main reason he came to Zhaoga City to participate in the plum meeting was to see if that person would come looking for him. But since Zhao Liu had said those words, and he had said it again when he was still in his early 20s, there was no harm in taking part in the chess tournament. It was just a game, just like what he had said to Tong Yin in the chessboard mountain. But was it really just a game? He got up and walked to the bookshelf to take down the Go set. He returned to the table and rearranged the game. He stood in front of the table, looking at the chessboard in silence for a long time. The colors of the black and white Go pieces were so distinct, but they seemed to become a whole in the end. He had won the game that day, but he was fully aware that he had won in a way that Tong Yin couldn't do. He didn't think it was an unfair victory, but from Tong Yin's point of view, it wasn't a crime to win the game. His current physical condition was quite special. His mental strength was almost limitless. If it were before, he wouldn't have been able to play Go to such a high level, even if he had learned it from a young age. Tong Yin's Go play was almost perfect today. If he hadn't used up too much of his mental and physical strength at the end and made the last 7 move too forceful, he wouldn't have been able to seize the opportunity to escape at any moment. Or if Tong Yin had slowed down the speed of playing Go and made this game a long one that would last dozens of days, the outcome of this game would still be unknown. As such, he could understand Tong Yin's pain at the end. "You are still the number 1 player in the world." Jingjiu said this to Tong Yin while looking at the Go board. When Jingjiu stepped into the hidden river on that mountain, he thought he wouldn't have any change this time. It looked like there would be some changes, though only a little. Or was it because he had been touched by something he hadn't been touched before? Jingjiu wasn't sure about this. It was too complicated to calculate the slight changes in his Dao heart, and he was very tired. He walked to the window and looked at the quiet small courtyard in the darkness of the night, feeling a bit perplexed for some reason. This kind of emotion, or any other emotion, was something that rarely appeared in his mind. A child's laughter and a woman's surprised screams suddenly came from the front of the small courtyard, followed by nervous hissing, and then it was quiet again. Perhaps the eldest brother of the Jing family had told his family about what had happened and the wager. If Jingjiu wanted to listen to their conversation, He would be able to, but he didn't do so. He had gradually calmed down. The chess tournament of the Plum meeting continued in the following days. Gu Yuan, whom the Windy Broadsword Church had high hopes for, was defeated by an unknown cultivation practitioner after 2 games because of the shock he received that day. Shang Jilo was also very tired mentally, so he didn't make it to the end. He left the chessboard mountain on the 5th day. The winner of the chess tournament was Cain Yang of the Mirror Sect. That young girl with freckles was indeed someone who had been instructed by Tong Yin in person. She had been affected by that Go game, but she had persisted until the end. It was said that she had comprehended something from that Go game, and her Go state had improved. That Go game was the one between Jing Jiao and Tong Yin on the first day of the chess tournament. Not many people cared about the result of the chess tournament of the Plum meeting. They were all discussing that Go game. The printing press in Jiaoga City had printed thousands of Go playing records as quickly as possible, and then they were all snatched up and sent to various manors. The Go board and Go pieces for the Go game between Jing Jiao and Tong Yin were sent to the royal palace on the same day. They were arranged according to the original conditions and then shaped by the Dao method. It was said that the emperor spent the whole night admiring them. Even the common people who weren't interested in the Go game were discussing this Go game with great interest. However, many of the details have been changed, which was quite amazing. Tong Yin left Jiaoga City directly, giving up the most important cultivation tournament. She stayed behind closed doors after returning to the Cloud Dream Mountain. It was said that the Zhongzhou school was quite dissatisfied with her because of this. Everybody knew that the Zhongzhou school was not dissatisfied with Tong Yin, but Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao had become a real celebrity, so the events related to him were brought up again and became the hot topic on the streets. For example, his experiences in the Aoyama sect, traveling tens of thousands of miles with Zhao Liu, killing people everywhere, and of course the scenes at the sword trial of Aoyama. Many people now knew that Jing Jiao was a special talent in sword work trained by the sword sect of Aoyama. As the third-ranked disciple of Liang Wang Peak, Gu Han was quite famous in the cultivation circle. Guan Nanshan was the principal disciple of Aoyama and had broken through the state of free travel. He was considered to be a swordsman of a young generation who could challenge Lo Huainan. Jing Jiao had only learned the sword work in Aoyama a few years ago, but he had defeated Gu Han and broken Guan Nanshan's sword. It was rumored that it wasn't a real contest, and that Jing Jiao had seized the opportunity when Guan Nanshan withdrew his sword at the last moment. However, a disciple in the initial state of the undefeated faced a swordsman in the state of free travel. Even if there was an opportunity, how many people could seize it? Thinking of the shocking Go game at the Plum meeting, Jing Jiao had gradually formed an image in people's minds, a handsome young master who was good at scheming. Soon after, new information began to circulate, which was said to come from the inner circle of Aoyama. Chapter 158. Some people in Aoyama had always suspected that Jing Jiao came from the Guocheng Temple. The first time was after the inherited sword competition, when Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu ascended the Shenma Peak, which attracted the suspicion of the Shanghai Peak. But at the time, more people thought that the Shanghai Peak had told a joke that wasn't funny after hundreds of years. It wasn't until the sword trial that Jing Jiao revealed the sword lights when he defeated Gu Han that many peak masters began to speculate in shock. This time, some people began to believe this theory. At least, Jing Jiao had some connection with the Guocheng Temple. After the chess tournament of the Plum meeting, this theory became even more convincing. Even Nan Wang wondered if he should ask the sect master to send a letter to the Guocheng Temple in private to ask about it. It was because Jing Jiao's calculation ability on the Go board was so powerful that it was unimaginable. Many people wondered if it was possible that the two-mind connection of the Guocheng Temple had helped him predict Tong Yan's every move in advance. Most importantly, when this theory began to spread in the cultivation circle, the Guocheng Temple didn't deny it. If all this was true, it meant that the Guocheng Temple had sent out another disciple of experiencing the mortal world after so many years, and this disciple had become the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. Many people couldn't help but wonder if Jingjiu could become the second broadsword king after witnessing such a legendary experience. What they didn't know was that the important figures in the Aoyama sect had this idea a long time ago. Jingjiu received more and more attention, and people were looking forward to his performance in the cultivation tournament. Tong Yin returned to the Cloud Dream Mountain to stay behind closed doors, but the young swordsmen like Lo Huainan, Bai Zhao, and Tong Lu would participate in the cultivation tournament. People hoped that Jingjiu could bring some surprises to the cultivation tournament. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for people's expectations to be dashed. The Nishiyama house reported that Jingjiu had no intention of participating in the cultivation tournament. Zhao Leu was the one participating in the law tournament at Shinma Peak. More than 10 days after the chess tournament, it was already late in spring in Jiaoga City. It didn't rain at all, and it was even a bit hot. Clouds floated in the azure sky and then landed on the surface of the lake. Together with the weeping willows on the lake bank and the faintly discernible flying eaves, it was a beautiful sight to behold. The Zhao family was a noble family in Jiaoga City, and their title of nobility was only one level lower than that of the state dukes. They had been wealthy for generations, but they had kept a low profile in the last 20 years because of that young mistress. However, they couldn't keep a low profile anymore because of the same reason. In the early spring, they spent a large amount of gold and silver to renovate the garden outside the city, making it look like a fairyland. It was because the young mistress would return to Jiaoga City in the spring, and it was stated clearly in the letter that she would bring a colleague as a guest. What kind of status did the young miss have? What kind of status did her fellow disciples have that even she had to invite? Without the fairyland scenery, how could she be worthy of the two immortal masters? The bow of the boat broke through the blue sky and white clouds on the surface of the water, drifting slowly and freely because no one was rowing. The number one calligrapher is Bai Zhao. Zhao Leu sat at the bow of the boat, her hair tousling in the breeze. Lying on the bamboo chair, Jingjiu was surprised to hear this, wondering why it wasn't Yamatai. Zhao Leu continued. Many people didn't expect that she could defeat those scholars in Yamatai, even though she had given up the painting that she was best at. Jingjiu said after some thought, "It looks like she is as smart as Tong Yin." Zhao Leu didn't understand what he meant. Jingjiu said, "There has always been a saying in the cultivation world that books are not as good as paintings in seeking the Tao, because paintings are the original form, and books need us to attach meaning to the shape. Bai Zhao has given up painting for books, because he has figured out that the meaning we attach to the shape is what we need to find in cultivation." Zhao Leu said, "I think he was inspired when he saw you playing chess with Tong Yin the other day." "What about you?" asked Jingjiu. This question was quite sudden, but Zhao Lei knew it was because Jingjiu knew what she was thinking. She, Bai Zhao, and Guodong were the three people who were often compared by the whole cultivation world, and even the whole land. At this year's plum meeting, Guodong won first place in zither, and Bai Zhao unexpectedly won first place in calligraphy. What about her? The news that Zhao Leu would participate in the plum meeting had been sold by the curtain rollers a long time ago, and it had become a well-known secret in the last few days. Zhao Leu didn't answer this question. Thinking of the most frequent questions asked by the curtain rollers, she asked, "Are you really a monk?" "You know I'm not," said Jingjiu. Zhao Leu asked, "Then why didn't the highly achieved monks of the Guoqing temple come out to refute the rumor?" Jingjiu said, "This kind of situation has happened before, because the monks also have their own selfish motives." Zhao Leu asked confusedly, "What's in it for them?" This way, they can protect the true successor of experiencing the mortal world. And the further I can advance, the better it will be for the reputation of the Guoqing temple. Jingjiu didn't want to continue this topic, so he asked directly, "How are you going to fight in the cultivation tournament?" Zhao Leu said, "I'll just fight." Or, "Do you have any experience?" Jingjiu said, "I'm not good at these things, and I believe you should be better than me." Jingjiu left without having dinner. Zhao Lei wasn't surprised. He didn't eat much in the first place. He had eaten many hot pot meals during the journey of tens of thousands of miles, but he only used the clear broth to cook a few leaves of vegetables to eat, and most of the time he just watched. What surprised her was that Jingjiu said he had to leave because he had something to do. How could a lazy person like him have something to do? And he didn't tell her what it was. But it was fine. Zhao Lei also had something to do, and she didn't want him to know about it. "Please come here," she said to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. A moment later, a girl in white appeared in the pavilion. She bowed to Zhao Lei and said, "Shuiyu Nunnery, Mo Shi pays her respects to the peak master." Looking at this girl whom she had met once, Zhao Lei asked, "What's the matter?" Mo, she lowered her head, so her expression couldn't be seen clearly. "Big Sister Guodong wants to meet you in the Mingtsue Valley 3 days later," she said softly. Zhao Lei arched her eyebrows. It was evident that Guodong wanted to meet her alone. Zhao Lei wasn't surprised, because she had sensed Guodong's gaze on her at the coal platform of the Plum meeting and on the chessboard mountain. The emotions in those gazes were quite interesting, containing concern, curiosity, and scrutiny, but no hostility. Okay. Zhao Lei agreed to her request. She didn't want Jingjiu to know about it. It was because Guodong was the personal disciple of Lin Sanwei in an inconspicuous small pub in Zhaoga City. The customers in the pub were still discussing the chess game on the chessboard mountain a few days ago. Shi Fengshan took a sip of the slightly sour yellow wine and said, "Zhao Lei will die in 3 days." A skinny old man sat across from him, stupefied as he put a pine kernel into his mouth, showing no reaction. The name of this old man was Liang Xingqing, an inconspicuous regular official in Zhaoga City. Few people knew that he was a distant brother of the royal teacher Liang, and their relationship was not that distant. Chapter 159. The small pine kernels were chewed, not much in quantity, but they were fragrant enough to make a cup of wine. Liang Xingqing picked up the wine cup and emptied it in one gulp. He glanced at Shi Fengshan and said, "You can even use the disciple of Shuiyu Nunnery?" Seeing the old man's ambiguous expression, Shi Fengshan laughed, saying, "I don't have such an ability. It's the people over there who are using them." Liang Xingqing furrowed his eyebrows in disgust, not wanting to hear that name, even if Shi Fengshan was referring to the people over there. Shi Fengshan continued with a smile, as if he didn't notice the taboo. As long as the guest has an idea, the people over there have the ability to realize it. Liang Xingqing put down the wine cup and asked Shi Fengshan, "What idea do you have then?" Shi Fengshan said seriously, "I just want to share the burden for your highness." It was very noisy in the small pub. The drunk people were arguing about the chess move and the chess move, drowning Shi Fengshan's voice. Liang Xingqing didn't believe what Shi Fengshan said, and neither did Shi Fengshan. However, they both knew that as chancellors, some things had to be said. He stared into Shi Fengshan's eyes and asked, "Are you sure about this?" Shi Fengshan said with a smile, "If Zhao Lei dies, the royal concubine will be the one to blame. Even if she is favored by the emperor, she will still die." Liang Xingqing picked up the wine cup and put it down again, saying, "Are you sure? The royal concubine is not an ordinary person. To be frank, even if she is the empress, so what? The emperor has to give an explanation to the sword sect of Aoyama." Shi Fengshan thought this advisor was as stupid as the crown prince, so he lowered his voice even more, but his tone became more serious. "The emperor went out to Li Mountain today. Master Niu and Master Jin are not with him, but he brought the royal concubine." Liang Xingqing was startled. Li Mountain was outside Zhaoga City, but the emperor didn't bring any staff with him. What was he going to do? Why did he bring the royal concubine? The argument in the pub continued, but the sour wine had lost its taste. A stern expression flashed across his skinny face as he said, "Do it well then." The royal tutor Liang looked like his distant cousin, Liang Xingqing, but he was taller and thinner and looked more like an immortal master than an official. He looked at the young man by the railing and waited patiently. Although he was the young man's teacher, he would never calculate the hierarchy like this. I think it is too risky. The young man threw the fish food in his hand into the pond under the fence, attracting countless fish and messing up the spring water. Of course, Grand Tutor Liang knew that this plan was not safe. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "But the news has been confirmed. The Duanli pill has indeed been discontinued for several days." He was the young man, and the young man. The young man was the young man's eyes. And Li King the up, and said, "Qing an emperor in and Jing Xian emperor, and Jing Xian thought so. He, and have, think, in emperors, comma." It was not until he heard the news that he realized his position as the crown prince was not secure. He looked at the royal teacher Liang and said coldly, "Even if royal concubine who died, my father could still have another son. Even if royal concubine who died, my father could still have another son." Jing Xian said to the royal tutor Liang. Jing Xian fell silent. In fact, he was fully aware that his question was meaningless. The son of any concubine would be a threat to him. It was because it represented his father's attitude. The meaning of the royal tutor Liang was clear. Any risk was worth it for the sake of the throne. What about me? How can I have nothing to do with this? I want to make sure that Niu Jin and the Aoyama sect can't find out. It's simple. It's because this has nothing to do with your highness. Do you believe that guy, Shi Fengchun? Yes, because I know where his hatred comes from. The royal tutor Liang said sentimentally, "Hatred is the most formidable force. It can help him keep all the secrets, even when he is facing the Aoyama sect." There are many small taverns in Jiaoga City. Shi Fengchun left the small tavern and walked into another small tavern after wandering in the cobweb-like streets for an hour. The drunkards in the tavern were still discussing the plum meeting, or more precisely, the Go game. Shi Fengchun furrowed his eyebrows unpleasantly. He walked into the tavern, nodded to the tavern owner, and followed him into the quiet storeroom. "How's the matter we talked about last time?" he asked the fat tavern owner. His expression was calm, but his mood was a bit weird. As the vice inspector of the Pure Heaven Bureau of the Imperial Court, the most important thing he should do when meeting the manager of Bulow Lin was to take him down instead of talking to him. The tavern owner looked at him with a smile, but didn't say anything. Shi Fengchun's patience was running thin. "If I can find you once, I can make sure you can't leave Jiaoga City ever again," he said sharply. "We're doing business, so we have to keep in touch with others. It's not surprising that the Pure Heaven Bureau can find me, just like everybody knows the history of the medical house by the White Horse Lake." The fat tavern owner continued with a smile, "And we've already proven our sincerity and ability. The problem is that you haven't told us what you're willing to pay. Since ancient times, it cost money to hire someone to kill someone. Bulow Lin was in this business, so he was no exception." Shi Fengchun relaxed a bit, saying, "I didn't expect the disciple of Shuiyu nunnery could be used by you. But why do you believe that Zhao Leu would agree to go there alone?" The fat tavern owner shook his head, saying, "It's not convenient to say. Let's get back to this business. What can you pay me?" Shi Fengchun said, "I'm handing myself over to you by doing business with you. As for how much you can get, it depends on how you use me in the future." The smile on the fat tavern owner's face grew wider, but his tone was full of mockery. How can a marginalized official of the Pure Heaven Bureau be compared to the 9 Peak Masters? Unless you were a state duke with real power, or the deputy commander of the Northern Army. Shi Fengchun didn't get angry. "What if I say I'm working for the Crown Prince?" he asked with a faint smile. The fat tavern owner didn't show any surprised expression. It looked like he had already guessed it. Interesting. But if you betray your master like this, aren't you afraid he'll kill you if he finds out?" "The Crown Prince trusts me, and I believe I can keep my mouth shut, even in the face of death and the soul-searching method. But if possible, I don't want to face the anger of Aoyama." Shi Fengchun stared at the fat tavern owner's 2 thin eyes, saying, "I can trust you, can't I?" The fat tavern owner suddenly felt this official of the imperial court was quite interesting, saying with a smile. Of course, the reputation of Bilo Lin is very valuable, and you have no value in betraying him. If Bilo Lin wouldn't betray Shi Fengshen, then Shi Fengshen wouldn't have the chance to betray the Crown Prince. So why would the Crown Prince want to kill him? It seemed that this was the main point of the conversation, but Shi Fengshen and the fat tavern owner both knew it wasn't the case. The fat tavern owner made it clear that Shi Fengshen had no value in betraying him, but the Crown Prince did. After this event, Bilo Lin would get enough benefits from the Crown Prince, which was why they were willing to participate in the deal. The only bargaining chip in this deal was the Crown Prince. After leaving the small pub and returning to his home in the southern part of the city, Shi Fengshen stood in the deserted and shabby courtyard, remaining silent for a long time. He was an honest official, doing things seriously and righteously. Those small sects that were supposed to flatter him didn't want to pay attention to him after being rebuffed a few times. Naturally, there wouldn't be any maids or servants in such a house, let alone singers. And he didn't have any family members. He was used to this kind of desolation, whether it was in Nanhezu or Zhaoga City. But for some reason, he suddenly felt sad when he thought that Zhao Liu would die in 3 days. They were all dead. It was better for them to die. Chapter 160. Shi Fengshen walked into the room and took out a thick pile of files from a secret drawer in the corner of the wardrobe and started reading them again at the desk. These files were all about Zhao Liu and Jingjiu. After the investigation by the Pure Heaven Bureau was terminated last year, these files were stored in the storage room and accumulated a lot of dust until he brought them home secretly 10 days ago. As he flipped through the files, he had already memorized the words and pictures on them, which were 74 lives and countless bloody scenes. The scenes flashed before his eyes and then overlapped with the scenes from many years ago. Can the cultivation practitioners kill people at will? Shi Fengshen closed the files and said after a moment of silence, I won't let the Aoyama sect have a second Taiping Jinren. He had a bad opinion of the Aoyama sect, which was reinforced by the behavior of the disciples of Liangwang Peak when he was in charge of the Pure Heaven Bureau in Nanhezu a few years ago. The so-called abhorrence of the evildoers was merely a cruel and bloodthirsty way of doing things. The style of the Aoyama sect would inevitably produce a disaster that would harm the human world. Zhao Liu's talent in cultivation, her future status, and her style of doing things reminded Jingjiu of that troublemaker. So Zhao Liu had to die. He couldn't tell anybody about this, because the matter of Taiping Jinren was the biggest secret in the cultivation world and also the biggest stain on the reputation of the Aoyama sect. If he used this reason, everybody would think he was crazy and wouldn't believe him, and the Aoyama sect would kill him right away. He had intended to meet the emperor and tell him about his worries, but the royal concubine never summoned him again. What else could he do without seeing the emperor? He had been thinking hard about how to kill Zhao Liu over the past year, but he couldn't find a way to do it. Until a few days ago, when he had nothing to do, he found a problem when he was organizing the books he had read recently. The Duanli pills in the royal palace were supplied by the Pure Heaven Bureau, but they were used less recently. In recent years, the emperor favored royal concubine whom more than anyone else, so the use of the Duanli pills had decreased. He even suspected that His Majesty had never thought of hiding this matter. He thought a way to get in touch with the Crown Prince's residence. As expected, the other party was shocked. The reaction of the Crown Prince's residence made him realize that the Crown Prince and those close to him were really stupid. They actually couldn't see that this was the Emperor's test. Of course, this kind of Crown Prince could be used. With a creak, the courtyard door opened. Shi Fengshen woke up from his contemplation, put away the file, and walked out of the door. A young manservant turned around and closed the door. Looking at him, he said happily, "Master, you're back." The young man's legs were a little inconvenient, so it was very strenuous for him to walk while carrying a basket of vegetables. Shi Fengshen said, "How many times have I told you? Don't call me master." "All right." The young man looked at his expression and said cautiously, "Master." Shi Fengshen couldn't help but smile. Seeing his smile, The youth was delighted from the bottom of his heart. His voice also rose a few octaves as he said, "I bought some fresh cabbage. I'm going to stir-fry some bacon tonight." Shi Fengtian wanted to say that he had already eaten, but after seeing Yi Futian smile, he shook his head and said, "Don't cook too much." Seeing the small and thin figure busy by the stove, Shi Fengtian showed a worried expression in his eyes. The child was Wang Xiaoming, whom he had picked up from the ruins many years ago. That year, the Western Sea Sword School and 2 practitioners of the Kunlun sect had a duel on the Funyo Mountain, which ended in a draw. It was said that the 2 sides had a good talk after the duel and drank many cups of the expensive sparrow tongue tea on the cloud boat, feeling like they had met earlier. However, these 2 practitioners didn't expect that the aftermath of their cultivation duel would weaken a large part of the mountain wall. A heavy rain occurred that night, and a mudslide rushed out from the mountain, swallowing a village. Of course, they didn't care even if they knew about it. Such incidents had happened many times in Chaotian, and the imperial court and the orthodox cultivation sects had experienced them a long time ago. In a sense, the Pure Heaven Bureau was a government office designed to clean up the mess of the cultivation practitioners. Shi Fengtian was still a middle-level official of the Pure Heaven Bureau at the time. Seeing the mountain full of ruins, he felt a bit disappointed, but he couldn't feel too angry because he had no other choice. According to the usual practice, the imperial court would compensate the villagers on behalf of the 2 sects, and some local officials who loved the villagers as their own children would even help them rebuild their houses. But the problem was that all the villagers had died, so who would get the money? Who would live in the houses after they were rebuilt? As he was about to leave, he suddenly heard a faint cry from the pile of mud and rocks. Now he knew that not all the villagers had died. Shi Fengtian adopted the infant whose leg had been broken by a stone. In order for him to live a safe and secure life, he gave him a common name. Since then, Wang Xiaoming had been following him from Yuzhou to Nanhezu, and then to Zhaoga City, doing all the trivial chores. Shi Fengtian didn't teach him anything, not even how to read and read. Now Wang Xiaoming was doing chores in a warehouse of the Pure Heaven Bureau, and he would come back to visit Shi Fengtian twice a month. "Master, dinner is ready." Wang Xiaoming's voice came out from the kitchen. Holding a bowl of plain white rice in his hands, Shi Fengtian looked at the plate of preserved meat and vegetables on the stove, saying, "Don't spend money carelessly in the future." Though his salary wasn't low, most of it was spent elsewhere, so he was poor, so he couldn't afford to give Wang Xiaoming any money. Wang Xiaoming said with a smile, "The preserved meat was given by 72, free of charge." Shi Fengtian knew 72 referred to one of his workmates, so he didn't say anything more. After dinner, Wang Xiaoming brought a cup of hot tea to him, saying, "Master, have some tea." Shi Fengtian took the tea and took a sip, narrowing his eyes. The tea was the common coarse tea at home, but as long as it was hot enough, it was comfortable to drink. Wang Xiaoming knew Shi Fengtian was in a good mood, so he asked carefully, "Master, when can I learn from you?" Shi Fengtian opened his eyes and asked him, "Do you really want to learn from me?" "Yes." Wang Xiaoming's expression was very serious. After a moment of silence, Shi Fengtian said, "In fact, you don't know this, but I asked someone to take a look at you when you were little. You have a good foundation, and you should have a bright future in cultivation." Wang Xiaoming suddenly stood up and yelled angrily, "I don't want to cultivate. I want to learn how to investigate cases from you, Master." Investigating cases requires brains, but in the face of absolute power, conspiracies are meaningless, and so is wisdom. Shi Fengtian looked into his eyes and said very seriously, "We are dealing with cultivation practitioners. If you want to learn how to investigate cases from me, you have to cultivate and become stronger than them. That's what I thought when I was a disciple of the 3 Pure Ones. Unfortunately, my talent was too ordinary, so I couldn't go far on this path. But you can." 3 days later, Zhao Leiyu went to the Mingcue Valley alone. The name Mingcue Valley was very common, which meant that the scenery was also very common, so common that it didn't deserve a special name. Besides, the road into the valley was very steep and difficult to walk on. Even in the most suitable season for walking in spring, there were no tourists. No matter how steep and difficult the road was, it wasn't a problem for cultivation practitioners. That was why cultivation practitioners could see more sceneries than ordinary people. Of course, there were dangers occasionally. There was a small stream in the Mingtsue Valley, and by the stream was a small Taoist temple that hadn't been maintained for a long time. Chapter 161. It was difficult to assassinate the cultivation practitioners because they were very sensitive to the changes of energy. Zhao Lei was good at calculating, and she had a brilliant sword heart, so she was more adept at this. However, she didn't find anything wrong when she entered the Taoist temple. It was not because she was distracted by the thought of meeting the personal disciple of Lien Sanyue, but because this formation didn't have any lethal intent. It was so calm that it blended in with the mountains and rivers, so it was hard to discover it. It was a marvelous and rare method to merge the energy of heaven and earth with the heaven and earth again. Only those profound orthodox sects with profound resources could achieve this. Along with the sword sound, the shabby Taoist temple was illuminated by the fiery red light, as if the twilight had arrived in advance and all the trees in the valley were set ablaze. The thoughtless sword was traveling back and forth in the air at an unimaginably high speed, cutting countless straight lines around her body, as if it was going to cut the space in half. Those extremely dense lines formed a barrier, protecting her inside. Zhao Lei was fully aware that the person who dared to attack her was not an ordinary cultivation practitioner, and she was no match for him. Her self-confidence and pride wouldn't affect her judgment. She had no intention of finding the enemy and attacking him. Instead, she employed the most powerful sword move to protect herself. This was not a sword move in a nine-death sword style, but a sword move created by the immortal Jingyang based on a certain magic method of Shui Yu nunnery, which was said to have something to do with a special insect called the heavenly silkworm. This was what Jingjiu told her when he taught her this sword move. Is this the thoughtless sword left by the immortal Jingyang? It's indeed perfect. Your sword style, your response, and your determination are all perfect. A man in black walked out from the red light that was as red as the twilight. This man in black had a very powerful energy, and his face was covered with a black cloth. He must have used some magic to change his appearance. Zhao Lei looked at him through the net of swords, saying nothing. She had some guesses about this person's true identity. He should have quite a high position in that sect, because he had his hands behind his back, appearing very confident and arrogant. The black-clothed man said, as expected of a legendary Zhao Lei, unfortunately, with your current cultivation, you can only sustain such a powerful sword move for a few dozen breaths of time. Moreover, you won't be able to use the sword letter to ask for help from your fellow disciples. In other words, you've trapped yourself in a dead end. What's the point of living for a while longer? Zhao Lei knew that what the man in black said made sense. At the same time, it was also a kind of temptation. Nan Wang and the disciples of Aoyama were still in Zhaoga City, which was less than 200 miles away. It wouldn't take long for them to arrive at their fastest speed. The problem was if she used the sword letter to ask for help. How long could she last without her flying sword? They might even be killed instantly. Zhao Lei didn't say anything because it was meaningless. There was no point in dragging the time. Her sword essence was rapidly draining away. The twilight grew thicker, and the shabby Taoist temple, shrouded in darkness, had a sense of vicissitudes of beauty. The beautiful scenery wasn't a beautiful thing, because it meant that the speed of the thoughtless sword was gradually slowing down, and the color would become brighter. It was because of the slowing down that the thoughtless sword began to produce a whistling sound and a sword wind. The shabby walls of the Taoist temple were blown by the sword wind, and the dust fell down. The mud statue in the Taoist temple had been eroded by the wind and rain with only half of its head left, and it was also shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. The sand fell on the ground like an hourglass. Time was approaching its end. Before the head of the mud statue was completely rubbed flat, Zhao Lei moved. She stretched out her right hand in the air in front of her. The twilight in the room suddenly gathered and fell on her hand, as if it had turned into a red sun. She held the thoughtless sword, and her body pierced toward the man in black, leaving a residual shadow behind. As long as the sword didn't leave her hand, she didn't have to worry about being affected by the powerful magic of the opponent. Back at the Sea God Temple outside of Haijo City, she used this move to kill the steward of Bulo Lin. The man in black was very calm. He must have known about this move of hers in advance, as he easily dodged several sword auras and then slapped down with his palm. What fell was a palm, but what flew up was a pair of sleeves. Perhaps he was afraid of the power of the thoughtless sword, or perhaps he didn't want to leave any traces behind, so he didn't use a magic weapon. Even so, he wasn't someone that Zhao Liu could resist. The sleeves of the man in black flew up, like ink-like waves in the dark night. The whistling wind followed the sleeves, extremely swift and fierce, but the aura was so majestic. It was obviously an orthodox magic of the Xianmen, extremely open and aboveboard. With a bang, Zhao Liu flew backward and slammed into the wall of the Taoist temple. Her body fell to the ground with the broken bricks like rain, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. The man in black casually flipped his sleeves and broke her unity of man and sword. The state gap between the two of them was too big, and it was impossible to make up for it with Dao heart, fighting will, and courage. But her expression was still so indifferent, and there was no fear on her face, because this was something that she had already figured out a long time ago. Just as she hit the wall, the thoughtless sword, which had been shaken away like a stone, suddenly broke through the roof as if it had regained its vitality. Whoosh! The thoughtless sword flew to the horizon and soon disappeared without a trace, leaving only a bloody residual shadow. This was the sword letter message. The man in black didn't pay attention to it, because this was also something that he had predicted or something that he hoped would happen. Even if Zhao Liu's state was higher than the intelligence, and she had broken through the upper state of the undefeated, the distance that she could control the sword was only a few miles. If she wanted to use the sword letter to inform her fellow disciples in Aoyama in Zhaoga City, she could only use that method to forcibly cut off the connection with the thoughtless sword and let it go. This method would cause the sword master to be badly injured by the backfire, and it would take a long time to re-establish the connection with the flying sword, so it was not worth it. The disciples of Aoyama would only make this choice when facing great danger, or even when they knew that they would die. Of course, if Zhao Liu could survive today, the price would be worth it. The problem was when the thoughtless sword was far away, what could she use to resist the opponent's attack? Or did she already know that she would die for sure? The man in black thought it was the latter. He slapped at Zhao Liu through the air. The air suddenly changed shape, and the light falling from the roof was refracted into a mess. A powerful and continuous power reverberated in the Taoist temple. It was like a mountain range stacked on top of each other, crushing forward. This violent power didn't affect the Taoist temple itself. There were no cracks on the dilapidated walls, and even the dust didn't fall. Such a precise degree of control proved that the man in black had a formidable state and something else. It was very unwise to deliberately carry out this kind of control at this moment. The truth was that the man in black didn't deliberately control the power, and everything happened naturally. The moves and methods contained the laws of heaven and earth. Zhao Liu's eyes grew brighter as she became more certain of the opponent's background. The palm of the man in black turned into a fist when it arrived in front of Zhao Liu. It was easy to imagine how heavy it was when the 10,000 mountains were condensed into a stone. Even the city walls of Zhaoga City would be punched through by this fist. The last thing the disciples of Aoyama wanted was to be approached by the enemy. Under such circumstances, the flying sword would be forced to defend and couldn't attack the enemy freely, which was tantamount to being tied to one's own hand. The man in black looked at Zhao Liu as if he was looking at a dead person. "You don't even have a sword. What can you do?" Zhao Liu raised her hands to meet the fist. Countless sword wills came out from her hands. The sword wills were extremely pure and sharp. Chapter 162. I want to change the name of Guodong to Guodong because I think this name is better and it suits her better. The expression of the man in black changed slightly. He didn't expect Zhao Liu to have cultivated the acquired stage sword body. At this moment, he understood Zhao Liu's thoughts. When she walked into the Taoist temple, she immediately summoned the thoughtless sword and used that strange sword technique to protect herself. This was a sign of weakness. When her sword origin couldn't support it anymore, she would take the initiative to cut off the connection with the thoughtless sword and let it escape as a warning or to show weakness. It was only at the most crucial moment that she used her hands and revealed the true power of her sword body. Even if she couldn't catch him off guard and hurt him, she could still buy him some time. As long as she could hold on for a while longer, there was a possibility that her fellow disciples would come to help. As expected of Zhao Liu, who was born to be good at fighting. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time. You still have to die. The black-clothed man's gaze passed through his blood-dripping fists and landed on her face. He thought that he had taken this matter seriously enough, but he had still underestimated the other party. Now, it seemed that he could no longer hold back, even if he might leave behind clues and bring a lot of trouble. Countless rays of light seeped out from the gaps between his fingers. The light was soft and lustrous. It was the purest treasure light. Who knew what kind of magic weapon he was holding in his hand? Dozens of cuts appeared on Zhao Liu's clothes, and a cut appeared on her left eyebrow, from which blood flowed out. She had tempered her body with the sword while on Yunqing Peak for many years, so her body and Taoist heart were far tougher than other cultivating geniuses of the same age. But at this time, she was facing a direct attack from a magic treasure. Her will was still firm, but her body's strength was limited. A sword intent suddenly came from the distant sky. A sharp and overbearing aura approached the valley at an unimaginable speed. It was highly possible that he was a practitioner in the broken sea state. The black-clothed man knew who it was, but he wasn't worried. 3 days ago, he and his companions had made many deductions about today's battle and confirmed that even if Zhao Liu could still hold on for a few breaths after sending the sword letter, the final result could not be changed. The distance between the Nishiyama house and the Mingtsue Valley was not too far, and it was impossible to get there in an instant. Outside the Taoist temple, the sound of a zither suddenly rang out. The sound of the zither was not very loud, but it was very clear. The Taoist temple was collapsing. The bricks fell to the ground and made a loud noise, but it could not drown out the sound of the zither. An ethereal aura appeared. The black-clothed man was very shocked because he could clearly feel that the aura was outside the Taoist temple. Why would someone come so close? The Mingtsue Valley was very remote, and there weren't even any wanderers. Why would a cultivator suddenly appear here? Unless someone knew in advance that he would set up a trap here, but who would know? In a very short period of time, the black-clothed man calculated the result and made a decision. If he wanted to kill Zhao Liu and the cultivator outside the Taoist temple at the same time, it would take some time for the experts of the Aoyama sect to arrive at the scene. As a cultivator, he never lacked decisiveness, wisdom, and courage, so he still didn't hesitate to give up such a great opportunity. With the falling bricks and sand, his figure gradually disappeared, but before he disappeared, he just glanced at Zhao Liu, who was covered in blood. The sound of the zither disappeared, and a young girl appeared outside the ruins of the Taoist temple. The black-clothed man had already disappeared. She looked at the green and ordinary mountain, without any emotion on her face. She didn't expect that her opponent's escape method would be so powerful, and she was not completely herself after all, so she didn't choose to chase after him, but stayed. It was late spring, but the young girl was still wearing a thick cloth, which looked a bit strange. She waved her sleeves, and the bricks in the ruins rolled away, revealing the ground. Zhao Liu sat in the corner. Her clothes were ragged, mottled with blood, and her hair was unkempt. She looked very embarrassed, but her expression was very calm. She looked at the young girl in the cloth and didn't say anything. Today, she fell into this trap and was almost killed because of the appointment made by her opponent. The young girl in the thick cloth was Guodong. the successor of Shui Yununri. Guodong walked over the bricks on the ground and stood in front of Zhao Liu. She helped her stop the bleeding with her fingers and said, "You're stupider than I thought." Zhao Liu said, "It's because I thought it was reasonable for us to meet, so I didn't think too much about it." "Why?" asked Guodong. Zhao Liu said, "You're the disciple of Lin Sanyue, and I'm the disciple of the immortal Jingyang. It's natural for us to meet." Sensing the remaining sword wills in the ruins, Guodong said after a moment of silence, "That's right. He has left this sword style to you, which means he has regarded you as his true disciple. As such, I should meet you." Zhao Liu tucked her messy hair behind her ears, missing Jing Jiao's wooden comb. She didn't want her current appearance to be seen by him. It was because he was the disciple of Lin Sanyue. A dozen seconds later, a violent wind rose up, and the stream in the Mingtsue Valley became chaotic. A sword light landed on the ground like a flash of lightning. It was the peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang. Seeing Zhao Liu's appearance, she asked with raised eyebrows, "Who's that?" "He left 15 seconds ago," replied Zhao Liu. "Trying to escape?" Nan Wang turned to look at the valley, a lethal intent showing on his face. Her cloth tousled in the wind, and countless formidable sword wills occupied the entire space in the Mingtsue Valley. An exceedingly powerful sword awareness spread out in all directions, enshrouding the mountains and fields within 3 square miles in an instant. Yet, she couldn't detect any energy of the cultivation practitioners. "It should be the escape method of heaven and earth," said Guodong. Nan Wang shot a glance at her, but didn't say anything. Though she didn't like Lin Sanyue, she didn't like Guodong either. She had to admit that this disciple of Shui Yununri was indeed knowledgeable. The sword lights arrived in the Mingtsue Valley one after another, landing by the stream. Dozens of disciples of the Aoyama sect came from Zhaoga City on their swords. Nan Wang said expressionlessly, "Assemble the sword formation and search for the enemies." Whoosh! The disciples of the Aoyama sect flew in all directions and formed a large sword formation, searching the mountains and fields within a radius of 50 square miles. Dozens of sword lights appeared in the sky, and they had even gotten close to the city walls of Zhaoga City. Many people were shocked. It didn't take long before the disciples of the Aoyama sect came back one after another. Yao Songzhan shook his head while looking at Nan Wang. Nan Wang didn't expect him to escape from the sword formation of the Aoyama sect, feeling both angry and alarmed. Was he really one of those old guys from the Zhongzhou school? "Are you all right?" Nan Wang asked while looking at Zhao Liu expressionlessly. Though he said it out of concern, his tone was harsh, devoid of any warmth. Zhao Liu's reply was even more harsh than Nan Wang's. Chapter 163. Zhao Liu was fully aware that Nan Wang didn't like her. To put it more precisely, Nan Wang liked her in the beginning, and he even wanted to take her as his personal disciple at the inherited sword competition. But after she chose to inherit the sword of Shenma Peak, Nan Wang's attitude toward her had completely changed. Many people in Aoyama knew that Nan Wang didn't like the immortal Jingyang, and he didn't show any respect to him. He had always called him by his name, and he had never called him young senior master. Zhao Liu was the peak master of Shenma Peak now. Though her cultivation state was much lower than Nan Wang's, her status in the sect was not lower. Since Nan Wang didn't like Shenma Peak, she wouldn't like him either. Hearing the conversation, Guodong thought it was quite interesting. She curled up the corners of her mouth, letting out a faint smile as she thought of something. Nan Wang was displeased. He turned to Guodong and asked, "What is going on?" Guodong said calmly, "My young sister Mo, she invited the peak master of Liu, Peak, to meet her in my name. She colluded with someone to set up a trap to kill her." She used a very simple sentence to explain the entire situation, because this was originally a very simple killing trap. Yet in the world of cultivation practitioners, simplicity often meant directness, and directness was the real danger. It was because only the truly powerful swordsmen were qualified to be direct, and they were much more formidable than conspiracies. If Guodong hadn't arrived in time that day, Zhao Liu would have been killed by the man in black, unless she had some other trump cards up her sleeve. But since she used Guodong's name to trick Zhao Liu to come here, she wouldn't tell Guodong about it. So, why did Guodong come here? Nan Wang stared at her, and so were dozens of disciples of Aoyama. Yao Songzhan and a few other disciples of Liangwang Peak had already formed the sword instructions with their hands hanging by their sides, ready to wield their swords at any moment. Under dozens of sharp gazes, Guodong's countenance didn't change, remaining as calm as before. Because I saw that there was something wrong with Shi, so I asked her a few questions. Well, I got the answer. I rushed over and didn't have time to inform you guys. If it was anyone else, this explanation would not be convincing at all. How could you tell that there was something wrong with your junior sister? And how could you make her confess after just a few questions? One had to know that this was a serious crime. However, it was Guodong who spoke, so what she said was quite convincing. Shuai nunnery was adept at the two-mind connection, and Guodong was the personal disciple of Lin Sanyue, so she knew it well. Nan Wang stared in her eyes and still didn't speak. Guodong understood what she meant, saying, "The nunnery will give us an explanation." Facing the aura of the peak master of Aoyama, she was not afraid at all. A beam of golden light landed in the valley. The stream turned into a golden whip. The golden light was not so dazzling, but it had a hint of Zen intent, more of a thick earth intent, giving the onlookers a solid feeling, like tens of thousands of city walls. A short and stout cultivation practitioner walked out from the golden light. The cloth he wore was also golden, as if it were made of golden silk. "Greetings, Peak Master Nan." Nan Wang nodded slightly, saying, "Gong Feng Jin." There was not much respect in her voice, nor was there any contempt. This meant that the other party's background was not simple. This short and stout man's name was Jin Mingsheng, a Gongfeng in the royal palace, as famous as Gongfeng Niu. Earlier, dozens of sword lights of Aoyama sect had appeared in the high sky, alerting many people in Zhaoga City. The imperial court had to come and pay some attention to them. Considering the status of Aoyama sect and the way they did things, the imperial court was cautious enough to invite this important figure. Jin Mingsheng came here with the sword light because he wanted to find out what had happened. But seeing Zhao Liu being treated by a colleague, he couldn't help but guess what had happened, his expression suddenly turning serious. Before he could ask, Zhao Liu said, "It's someone from Zhongzhou School." Hearing this answer, Jin Mingsheng couldn't keep his solemn expression any longer because he was too shocked. Nan Wang had already known it, but he snorted once. Yet, the disciples of Aoyama had just learned of it, their expressions turning grave. They were not afraid of it, but they thought it was troublesome. If it were another sect that dared to set up a trap to kill Zhao Liu, the disciples of Aoyama wouldn't have to wait any longer. They would go straight to the mountain gate of the other party and kill the murderer. However, since it was the center sect, they might need some evidence to prove it. After all, the other party was the second sect in Chaotian. Guodong said it should be Zhongzhou School. It's because he used the escape method of heaven and earth when he left in a hurry. Gongfeng Jin thought it was not enough, saying with narrowed eyes, "Let's find the evidence first." Having said that, he sighed in his mind, knowing that the Aoyama sect wouldn't let it go easily even if they couldn't find the evidence. If the two largest sects in Chaotian became enemies, how big a disturbance would it be? Or would it become a bloody war? All of a sudden, he sensed the energy coming from a distant mountain, turning his head abruptly to look in that direction. Nan Wang also looked in that direction. Zhao Liu said, "Check the energy of the magic treasure. His hand is wounded." Having said that, she shot a glance at Guodong. It was because she noticed that Guodong looked in that direction even earlier than Gongfeng Jin and Nan Wang. The man in black was fleeing in the mountains and fields. He couldn't leave by riding the air because it would be too conspicuous and would be discovered by others. To say nothing of the swordsmen of the royal family in Zhaoga City, the 1,000-mile Great Formation of the Cloud Dream Mountain could easily discover him. He knew his big brother's sect master very well. If his big brother's sect master was certain that he had done it, He would kill him mercilessly on the spot and send his corpse to Aoyama's sect. If he wanted to be the leader of the orthodox cultivation sects, he had to be good at forbearance. He had to be patient with his peers and be cruel to his peers. Thinking of all this with a sneer, his figure turned invisible and passed through a patch of wild peach forest. In the next moment, he appeared on the cliff on the opposite side. Traveling in the mountains and fields was of course much slower than riding the air. But he wasn't worried, because he was using the escape method of heaven and earth. The escape method of heaven and earth of Zhongzhou school could be considered the best in the world. He could hide by using the energy of heaven and earth. The green water of Aoyama, the broken cliffs, and the ancient trees could all conceal his trace. As long as he wasn't tracked by the sword discernment of the swordsmen of the Aoyama sect in the Broken Sea state, he believed that he would be able to escape. But he was a bit regretful that he couldn't kill Zhao Liu under such circumstances. Zhao Liu had cultivated the sword body, and the sudden sound of the zither were all accidents. What an assassin hated the most was encountering accidents. They only liked to surprise people. But he had encountered too many accidents that day. Just like at this moment, he suddenly discovered that a gaze fell on him. Who could see through his escape method of heaven and earth? The black-robed man was surprised. Suddenly, a broadsword cut through heaven and earth and came in front of him. The broadsword was pitch black, with some mottled copper rust on its body. It looked extremely gloomy, like a ghost weapon. The black-robed man roared and punched the black broadsword with his right fist. Countless milky white lights were sent out along with the wind generated by his fist. He used the natal magic weapon that was given to him by his sect without hesitation. It was not hard to imagine how much mental pressure he was under after his escape method of heaven and earth and the extremely gloomy ghost broadsword were exposed. Whoosh! The black saber had actually dispersed. In front of the black-robed man's eyes, there were spots of ghostly fire. The tens of thousands of lights shot out by the magic weapon were instantly eroded by the seemingly colorless, ghostly fire, and their power was suddenly weakened. Soul fire. The black-robed man's pupils shrank, and he shouted in a stern voice, full of terror. Chapter 164. The man in black didn't dare stay any longer. He retrieved his magic treasure and turned around to flee. He leaped into the air and leaped up by stepping on the leaves. His body suddenly became vague, and he was about to ride on the air to escape, no longer caring if he would be discovered. Who would have thought that the moment the tip of his foot left the leaf, the sky would suddenly darken? A patch of black fog appeared on the top of the trees, as if it had been waiting for him. The patch of black fog landed on his face. It was dark in front of the man in black. He fell down stiffly and landed on the accumulated leaves, no longer breathing. The black fog quivered slightly in the wind, but it didn't disperse. A pale face could be vaguely seen in it. The wind grew stronger. The black fog moved forward silently to the ground, looking like the black eaves of Taichung Temple washed by the rain, which were the horns of the old dragon. The black fog drilled into the cracks of the cliff, and as it was about to disappear, it suddenly twisted violently. The pale face in the fog had been emotionless and indifferent, but it suddenly twisted, full of shock and anger. A huge hand came out of nowhere and grabbed the patch of black fog. The huge hand had a green glow to it. The green glow was as fresh as the green grass, but also looked like the rotten flesh of a corpse. They were clearly two completely different feelings, but they were unified by this giant hand, giving off an extremely strange feeling. The huge green hand closed over the black fog. The black fog struggled and twisted with all its might in an attempt to escape, but it couldn't. Soon after, the black fog dispersed abruptly along with a low and angry cry, turning into countless soul fires. These soul fires were of a very high state. Even though they had traveled a great many miles from the underworld to Chaotian, they were still colorless and traceless. If these soul fires were allowed to scatter among the cliffs, it would be hard for the human cultivation practitioners to discover them, and they would turn into resentful spirits in a few hundred years. Unfortunately, these soul fires were not as lucky as those on Shinma Peak. They were poured into a hole along with all the remaining black fog, along with a gust of strong wind. The black fog disappeared without a trace, and the view became clear again. It turned out that the hole was a mouth. There were many tiny teeth in that mouth. That person had a round and thick nose, and the tip of the nose was a bit red, looking like an underdeveloped carrot. That person's eyes were as deep as two holes. That person was a short old man. He had no aura at all, but he gave off an incomparably powerful feeling. Having swallowed these soul fires, the old man didn't stay any longer. He shook his arms and passed through the dense forest soundlessly like a large bird, instantly becoming a dark speck in the distance. As he reappeared, he was already at the edge of a cliff 100 miles north of Xiaoga City. A young man was sitting at the edge of the cliff. The young man was holding a bamboo pole in his hand. A thin line was tied to the tip of the pole, and the line was dangling into the clouds between the cliffs. It looked like he was fishing. How could there be fish in the clouds? Was he fishing for birds? I'm impressed. I didn't expect you to be able to make the netherworld work for you. The short old man looked at the young man and said, to be able to kill the nascent soul elder of the Zhongzhou school from so far away, this underworld kid's level is not bad. The young man did not turn his head. He stared at the flowing clouds below the cliff with an extremely focused expression. The clouds gradually became chaotic, and black spots could be vaguely seen traversing through them. The invisible birds stared at the food tied to the bamboo pole and cawed greedily. Seeing the chaotic scenes in the clouds, the young man shook his head and then started answering the old man's question. The third disciple of the underworld master is of course good, though he only dared come here through his shadow. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked you to help me. The old man let out an unpleasant laugh as he continued. When will you be able to bait the underworld master out? I haven't seen him for a long time, and the others haven't seen him for a long time either. I think it will be quite lively. The young man said, they're all the pitiful old masters who have been killed by our Aoyama. If you don't dare show yourself, how can he show himself? The old man asked after a moment of silence. Are you sure the Aoyama sect doesn't know I'm out? Who in the world knows Aoyama the best? The young man inserted the bamboo pole into a crack in the rocks by the cliff's edge. He turned to the old man and gave a thumbs up to his own face, saying with a smile, It's me. It's me. His originally cold face suddenly became adorable because of this smile. With a hint of laziness, it was very amiable. Looking at this face, the old man sighed as if he had thought of something. I've been hiding underground for a few hundred years. The world has changed so much that a person like you can only hide. It's really sad. The young man arched his eyebrows and said, You talk too much. The old man suddenly said with a serious expression, I want to eat a few people. I'm really hungry. Those soul fires are tasteless. Even if I don't have a little girl, I can eat a few men. All right. The young man felt helpless. He put away the bamboo pole and led the old man walking toward the outside of the cliff. The old man followed him hastily. The young man shot him a sideways glance and said, Why do I feel like I have a dog now? Woof woof. The old man said obsequiously, As long as you can wipe out the Aoyama sect and get rid of my future trouble, I don't mind being your dog for another 300 years. The young man said, But you have to protect me first. Don't let me be killed by those two rebellious disciples. The old man smiled bitterly. I can't beat them right now. That's why we have to hurry. The young man sighed and rubbed the old man's head. The clouds at the bottom of the cliff calmed down. The birds disappeared. The forest was illuminated by a cold sword light, then lit up by the golden light. Nan Wang and Serene were the first to arrive at the scene. The rest of the Aoyama disciples arrived one after another. Looking at the corpse of the man in black, their expressions changed. The man in black had a sword wound on his hand. The residual aura of his treasure was also clear. He should be the culprit who attacked Zhao Liu. But why did he die here? Nan Wang flicked his sleeves. The cloth covering the man's face was lifted. His aura was completely gone. His appearance that was changed using Dao couldn't be maintained any longer. His real face was revealed. Wei Chenzi? Serene was shocked. Nan Wang's expression was terrible. There was dead silence. The person who wanted to kill Zhao Liu was indeed someone from Zhongzhou School. Moreover, he was a nascent soul elder. Nen Wang asked, "How did he die?" Sir Jean waved his hand. Golden powder-like objects fell on the ground within 100 feet of him. The golden powder slowly faded. Some images could be faintly seen. It was very blurry, but they could tell what it was from its aura. Soul fire. The Aoyama disciples couldn't help but exclaim. The underworld fiend appeared again. Very strong, not much weaker than you and I, and it was only a shadow. Sir Jean felt the residual aura of the soul fire and said solemnly. Nan Wang didn't say anything. No wonder Wei Chenzi, a nascent soul elder from Zhongzhou School, was killed in one move. Even his nascent soul couldn't escape. The Aoyama disciples looked at each other speechlessly. The atmosphere was very depressing and strange. Chapter 165. The Mingtsue Valley had never been as famous as it was that day, and it had never been as crowded as it was that day. The figures were everywhere on both sides of the stream, and in the forest and the valley, the sounds of footsteps and conversations echoing in the air. The magic army of the imperial court had sealed off both ends of the 10-mile stream. The sharp sword lights and the magic treasures reflected each other in the sky. This place had become a forbidden area. At least tens of thousands of soldiers and peasants were searching for even the slightest trace in the mountains and fields of 100 square miles. The officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau were searching the most important places. In the ruins of the Taoist temple by the stream, under a wild tree in the deep end of the valley, official robes could be seen everywhere. Wei Chenzi's corpse was still under that wild tree, his eyes closed, as cold as a rock. He had a high status in both the cultivation circle and Zhaoga City, but his corpse was left in the wilderness for half a day without being noticed. Nobody dared move the corpse because it was such a serious matter that the clues would be destroyed. To say nothing of the conspiracy behind the sudden appearance of the devil men of the underworld, this event itself was enough to shock the whole land. An elder in the Yuanying state of Zhongzhou School had set up a trap to assassinate the master of Shinma Peak of the Aoyama sect. Considering the current status of Zhao Leu, it was no exaggeration to pay more attention to her assassination. More importantly, the imperial court had to pay more attention to this case because everybody was worried about the reaction of the Aoyama sect. As a marginalized official of the Pure Heaven Bureau, Shi Fengchen had to be pushed to the forefront of such an arduous and unrewarding case. He pulled back his line of sight from Wei Chenzi and walked to the edge of the cliff, looking at the mountains and fields lit up by tens of thousands of lights, remaining silent. Zhao Leu was still alive, but the assassin of Bulow Lin was dead, killed by the devil men of the underworld who hadn't set foot on the land for many years. That assassin was an elder of Zhongzhou School. The development of the situation was far beyond his imagination. This event was many times more complicated than he had imagined. Shi Fengshan felt a pair of eyes staring at him from the distant mountains and fields. Those eyes were devoid of any emotion. His body gradually grew cold. In Zhaoga City, Jing Jiu stood in front of the window and looked at the thoughtless sword lying in Silence's hand. No one knew what he was thinking. Under the twilight, the thoughtless sword looked even redder, as if it had just killed someone. At the most dangerous moment, Zhao Leu cut off the connection with the thoughtless sword and asked it to return to Zhaoga City to ask for help from her colleagues in Aoyama. The thoughtless sword had delivered the sword letter to the Nishiyama house. After completing its mission, it went somewhere unknown. Naturally, it followed the scent and returned to Meng Qi's hand. At that moment, he knew that something had happened to Zhao Leu. However, with his current cultivation level and the speed of his flying sword, even if he rushed over, he would not be able to make it in time, so he did not go. After that moment, whether Zhao Leu was alive or dead, he didn't need to go there anymore. He just needed to wait for the result. The wall behind the bookshelf moved aside noiselessly, and Duke Liu walked out from it. He had a solemn expression on his face, with sweat on his temples. He came to the back of Jing Jiu and reported, "The Peak Master has been sent back to the Zhao Manor, guarded by Gongfeng Jing himself." The rest of them have returned to the Nishiyama house. Jingjiu, who was known for his calmness and low profile, was stunned speechless for a long time after he learned of the incident at Taichung Temple. Then he hurried to the imperial palace. It was not because of the relationship between Zhao Liu and Jingjiu, but because of the identity of Zhao Liu and the importance of the incident. If the Aoyama sect couldn't keep calm, what would the Zhongzhou school do? How could the imperial court remain calm when the cultivation world was in turmoil? What could the people in the world do? Jingjiu didn't say anything. He stood in a patch of bloody light. Duke Lu didn't know it was the red light emitted by the thoughtless sword. He thought it was the sunset outside the window. Looking at Jingjiu's back, he felt inexplicably nervous and unconsciously bent his waist a little more. In his knowledge, Jingjiu should be the successor of the owner of the wooden plate. He was still very young, and his state was not very high. But for some reason, he felt a great mental pressure even though Jingjiu was just standing there quietly. Jingjiu said, "It's good that you're fine. You can go back first." Duke Lu didn't dare to say anything more. He bowed and left through the tunnel. Jingjiu left the window. His hands shook slightly, and the thoughtless sword turned back into the sword rope, which then fell on his wrist and turned into a bracelet. He walked to the bookshelf, took down the iron sword, put it on his back, and left the manor. The Zhao manor was brightly lit. There was no one on the street, but the tense and somber atmosphere was so thick that it seemed to exist. No one knew how many highly skilled swordsmen of the imperial court were hiding in the dark. Of course, there were also disciples of the Aoyama sect. Jingjiu walked to the gate of the Zhao manor and stepped on the stone steps. The atmosphere in the dark street changed slightly, and then quickly returned to normal. The gate was pushed open. A steward looked at him with vigilance and fear, saying, "Something happened in the manor today." Before he could finish, he saw that face and remembered the rumor in the other garden 3 days ago. Slightly surprised, he quickly stepped aside and invited Jingjiu in. It was very quiet in the Zhao manor. The maids and servants were all ordered to stay in their rooms. No one could be seen, nor could the usual laughter and chatter be heard. When they came to the innermost courtyard, the steward left. Jingjiu walked in and saw a short and fat man. The short and fat man was wearing a golden robe, which glittered in the darkness. Of course, even if he wasn't wearing the robe, he would still shine with golden light because his breath was strong and bright enough. Jingjiu knew that this man was Serene of the imperial palace. He hadn't seen him by the emperor's side the last 2 times, but the emperor had mentioned him. It was said that he was loyal to the royal family. It seemed that this Sir Jin's state and strength were indeed good. Tonight, he came to be Zhao Liu's bodyguard, which was the emperor's way of expressing his attitude. Of course, Jingjiu knew that this also meant that the emperor must have begun to suspect someone. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to this person. He looked at Zhao Liu's parents who came out to greet him and nodded to them. His eyes lingered on Zhao Liu's mother for a while longer, and then he walked into the room. The atmosphere in the Nishiyama house was even more tense and oppressive than the Zhao manor. It was deathly silent, even though there were so many people in the room. Nan Wang sat in the chair, his expression as cold as ice. The disciples of Aoyama who didn't go to the Zhao manor were all present, their expressions solemn. The Duke of He represented the imperial court, and he hadn't left since noon. A highly achieved monk of Guoqing Temple came with him. This person was quite interesting because this highly achieved monk was the principal justice of the Guoqing Temple and had a close relationship with the Aoyama sect. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau came back from the Mingtsue Valley. He entered the room with a grave expression on his face. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and reported the latest situation. "We used the heavenly pattern mirror borrowed from the imperial palace to confirm it. It was indeed the underworld fire that killed Wei Chenzi, and it was of a very high state. We have to investigate further," Nan Wang said expressionlessly. "This is not what I want to hear." The Duke of He said hurriedly, "Sir Jean is guarding the Peak Master in person, so Zhaoga City is safe. As for the investigation, the Pure Heaven Bureau will do their best." Chapter 166. Hearing Nan Wang's words, Duke of He and the others felt helpless, thinking that the Aoyama Sword sect was not only good at saying harsh things, but also good at saying weird things. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, the principal justice of the Guoqing temple tried to dissuade them. Duke of He leaned closer with his hand on the armrest of the chair and said in a low voice, "We can't start a war because of this, can we?" Nan Wang arched his eyebrows slightly, saying, "Why not? If it were any other cultivation sect, they wouldn't start a war even if they encountered such a situation, because their opponent was the Zhongzhou school. In the whole world, only the Aoyama sect had the qualification and style to start a war." The atmosphere became tense again. Duke of He said hastily, "But Zen Master has said it, and I believe the peak master of Qingrong must understand that even though it was Wei Chunzi who did it, it wasn't the intention of the Zhongzhou school." Nan Wang sneered, but didn't say anything. The rest of the disciples of Aoyama also remained silent. What the young Zen master said was right. The Aoyama sect didn't think that assassinating Zhao Liu was the collective intention of the Zhongzhou school, because it would do no good to the Zhongzhou school. Zhao Liu had natural Tao quality, but such a talented disciple was not rare in the history of the cultivation world. Didn't Qingguang Peak have Zhuo Rizhui? If she was killed, the future of the Aoyama sect would be affected, but its current strength wouldn't be affected. Most importantly, she was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang and the peak master Shenma Peak, so she had a high status. If the Zhongzhou school really wanted to kill her, it meant that they wanted to start a war with the Aoyama sect. But if that happened, the Zhongzhou school would make a big move to shake the foundation of Aoyama. Not to mention Zhao Liu. Even Nan Wang didn't have the right to do so. The Zhongzhou school could only target the sect master of Aoyama and Yuan Qijing, the two figures in the heavenly arrival state. Seeing the reactions of Nan Wang and the others, Duke of He knew that Zen Master was right. The biggest crisis of the human race wouldn't happen. The most important thing now was to find out the truth of the case and find out what price Zhongzhou school was willing to pay to repair the relationship between the two sections. If this was really done by the old ones, has their hands already reached into the Cloud Dream Mountain? Zhongzhou Lin did sect, Bulo Lin and Yin said school 1-2, Chong Qijing and of 2, school 1-6 Yin. One more question. If it was Bulo Lin who asked the devil men of the underworld to kill Wei Chong, Wei Chenzi, why didn't they clean up the traces? If they didn't have enough time, they wouldn't have asked the devil men of the underworld to do it. Even Bulo Lin wouldn't be willing to bear the crime of colluding with the underworld. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau continued. Nan Wang said, "I don't care what secrets there are. Since it was the elder of your Zhongzhou school who did it, you should say what you should say." It was quiet again. Nan Wang's meaning was clear. It was the Zhongzhou school who should say something. What they should say was, of course, an apology and a price. Many gazes were fixed on a spot. There was a tall figure there. Lo Huainan had been standing here since he arrived at the Nishiyama house in the morning. He hadn't moved from the beginning to the end, nor had he taken a sip of water, nor had he eaten anything. His attitude was quite proper. It wasn't until now that the Aoyama sect finally started to question him that he made his first statement. "Our Zhongzhou school will bear the full responsibility for this matter." What he said was quite nice, but like many things in the world, the nicer it was, the more unrealistic it was. Since it couldn't be described, there was no way to test it. "Can you bear the responsibility?" asked Nan Wang, arching his eyebrows. Lo Huainan said with a normal expression, "Master's wife has already gone south after hearing the news. She should have reached the Tianguang Peak by now." The Chief Justice of the Guoqing Temple uttered the name of Buddha, saying, "That's good." Duke of He also showed a delighted expression, saying, "That's the best." Nan Wang fell silent, saying nothing more. The sect master of the Zhongzhou school was the most important figure in the cultivation world. If there was anyone on the Cloud Dream Mountain who had a higher status than him, it would be his cultivation partner, who was also in the heavenly arrival state. She was the master's wife that Lo Huainan had mentioned. The wife of the sect master went to the Aoyama sect in person, indicating the sincerity of the Zhongzhou school. She would discuss the details with the sect master of the Aoyama sect and Yuan Qijing, and it was believed that the Zhongzhou school would have to pay a high price for it. In comparison, the wager between Jing Jiao and Tong Yin regarding the distribution of crystals at the chess tournament of the Plum meeting was not worth mentioning. Seeing the Zhongzhou school's attitude, Duke of He and the Chief Justice of the Guoqing Temple both felt relieved. Seeing Nan Wang's reaction, they thought that all they needed to do now was to comfort Zhao Liu. Nan Wang knew what they were thinking, saying, "You're wrong. It's not enough." "Who else?" asked the Duke of He with a slightly surprised expression. "Jing Jiao," said Nan Wang. Hearing this name, the people present were all startled. In their minds, even though Jing Jiao was a talented swordsman trained by the Aoyama sect, and he had become famous after the chess tournament of the Plum meeting, and he was the personal disciple of the immortal Jing Yang, he still wasn't qualified to participate in such an important event. Yet, Lo Huainan was very quiet, as if she had guessed it. Yao Song's Han said, "Senior Master Jing Jiao is a person who bears grudges." The disciples of Aoyama nodded in agreement. Back when Lu Shui had just entered the sword-washing stream, he was beaten a few times by Gu Han in order to see Jing Jiao. Later, at the inherited sword competition, Jing Jiao beat Gu Qing back to him. At last year's sword trial, Jing Jiao beat Ma Hua of Liangwang Peak to the bottom of the stone forest and wounded Gu Han severely. In the end, he even broke Guan Nanshan's sword. It was a revenge. At this moment, the news came to the Nishiyama house. They learned that Jing Jiao had gone to the Zhao Manor house. He didn't stay there for long before he left. Nobody knew what he had talked about with Zhao Liu. Something happened when he left the Zhao Manor house. Duke of Yi said with a complicated expression, Mo Shi, the disciple of Shui Yu nunnery, had his limbs broken and thrown to Jing Jiao's feet. Nan Wang glanced at Lo Huainan, saying nothing. Everybody understood what she meant. This was the order that Shui Yu nunnery had given to the Aoyama sect. Many people, including Duke of He, had guessed that it was Guodong who had dealt with the matter. That young woman had the demeanor of her master, as fierce as the west wind. Lo Huainan suddenly felt that it was not a good idea to ask her young sister to persuade Jing Jiao. In front of the Zhao Manor house, she was lying by Jing Jiao's feet, covered in blood. She lifted her head and stared at Jing Jiao, her eyes full of despair and hatred. Jing Jiao gestured for the caretaker of the Zhao Manor house to come over, saying, "Send him back to Shui Yu nunnery in the same way." Shui Yu nunnery's style was peaceful and quiet until Lien Sanyue came out. Jing Jiao was quite familiar with this kind of hardcore scene. He understood what she meant. It was enough for him to see it. Jing Jiao turned around and left. "Mo," she yelled sternly, "don't you want to know why I did it?" "I don't." Jing Jiao didn't halt his steps. Seeing Jing Jiao disappear into the darkness of the night, she was stunned. Chapter 167. Jing Jiao stood in front of the window with a cup of tea in his hand, looking at the looming black eaves of Taichung Temple in the distance. He remained silent. The tea in the cup had already turned cold. He had no love for tea. He just tried to hold the cup like an ordinary person trying to understand those ordinary people in this way. He was thinking about Shui Yu nunnery's words and the girl's words before he left. Eventually, he still couldn't figure it out and shook his head. Now that things had come to this, the next thing to do was to move forward. Why should he turn back and ask for the reason? Even if he knew your life background, love experience, and occasional impulsive mistakes, it was meaningless. He shouldn't waste his time on these things. There was a knock on the door. Jing Jiao walked back to the room from the window. He touched the sword bracelet with his right hand, lit the sword fire, and put on the teapot. Squeak. The eldest brother of the Jing family pushed the door open. He didn't refuse her entry, not knowing whether he knew her or for some other reason. He didn't even ask for Jing Jiao's permission. The guest came with a night breeze. Her footsteps on the begonia petals made no sound. The girl in white was extremely beautiful. She looked delicate and her eyes were clean, like a pool of clear water. She looked like a fairy who had fallen to the mortal world. Jing Jiao motioned for her to sit down. He picked up the boiling teapot and poured her a cup of tea. He thought that the other party would send someone to comfort or persuade him, but he didn't expect it to be this girl. Bai Zhao was the only daughter of the headmaster and his wife of Zhongzhou School. She had a special status in Yunming Mountain. Even in the whole world of cultivation, she was very noble. She came to see Jingjiu, which meant that Zhongzhou School had shown enough respect. Bai Zhao thanked him softly. She picked up the cup and took a sip. Her expression changed slightly. She didn't expect the tea to taste so bad. Even if the Aoyama sect didn't care much about these things, they still had the precious tree house to offer them, so they shouldn't drink such tea. The most important thing was that the tea was brewed in the wrong way. A pot of cold tea was boiled again by the sword fire. The taste was naturally not good. Jingjiu didn't know what she was thinking and thought she didn't know what to say. So he said, "Please say it." Bai Zhao thought to himself, "So she's an impatient person. If that's the case, I'll have to change my style of doing things." The possibility of Wei Chunzi breaking through to the late stage of nascent soul is very small. The sect's support for him is also not sufficient. However, he is still an elder of our Zhongzhou school. It is very difficult to bribe him. For Bulo Lin to be able to do this, it means that their hands are much deeper than we thought. The most troublesome thing is that Bulo Lin might be related to the underworld. She looked into Jingjiu's eyes and said seriously, "So our idea is that we should be more cautious in investigating this case." Both the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school were the leaders of the orthodox cultivation circle. Of course, they should examine the case of Zhao Leiyu's assassination from the perspective of the whole situation and then make the safest judgment. Jingjiu understood what she meant, but he was not good at making such judgments, or he didn't think it was important. He asked, "Why did you come to me? I heard about what happened in the old plum garden from Brother Luo. Although he and I don't quite understand it. It seems that Peak Master Leiu cares a lot about your opinion." Bai Zhao's voice was very gentle, and his tone was very honest. If you are willing to keep silent for the time being, or if she is also willing, this matter won't be too serious. Jingjiu asked, "Have you confirmed that Wei Chenzi is Bulo Lin's man?" Bai Zhao said, "Sorry, it's not convenient for me to say." Jingjiu said, "Even if we don't say anything, the masters in Aoyama, including your parents, won't let go of Bulo Lin." Hearing this, Bai Zhao revealed a mocking smile. Jingjiu knew that this smile wasn't for him. So who was it for? Looking at the night sky outside the window, Bai Zhao said softly, "I know my parents and I know your masters because they are essentially the same kind of people. They won't be willing to start a war easily because Bulo Lin is not easy to deal with. More importantly, they're used to cultivating in peace." There are two meanings in saying that one would not be disturbed by worldly affairs. The more important meaning was that one did not want to be disturbed by worldly affairs. Jingjiu understood what she meant because he was the same kind of person. When a cultivation practitioner reached the middle and late stages of their lives, their attitudes toward worldly affairs were naturally different from those of the young, and their views were completely different from those of ordinary people. Because of Jingjiu's silence, Bai Zhao seemed to have misunderstood something and said something else. "We're just asking you to keep quiet for a while, so as not to ruin the whole situation. In fact, we're ready to start a war with Bulo Lin." Jingjiu knew what she meant. Just now he asked her if she had confirmed that Wei Chenzi was Bulo Lin's man, which was also a confirmation. A few years ago, when Lu Shui ate the devil pill in the muddy river outside Chaonan City, it was the beginning of this preparation. But he wasn't sure who the Wei Bai Zhao mentioned many times was. "Who are you?" he asked. Bai Zhao looked at Jingjiu in silence for a long time. It was quiet in the room. The copper teapot gave off a faint metallic sound after the rapid change of temperature. As Jingjiu thought she wouldn't speak, her voice rang out. Big Brother Luo, Tong Yin, Mi Wanshu, and a few other colleagues, Tonglu the Western Sea Sword School, Shuiyu Nunnery, Guocheng Temple, Kunlun Sect, and some young disciples of Tunghua Temple. Bai Zhao continued calmly. "In your Aoyama, there are Guanan Shan, Jinryun, Guhan, Mahua, and some disciples of Liangwang Peak. This was an inexplicable trust and honesty. Jingjiu now understood why Lo Huainan and Tong Yin didn't like him. What's your intention in organizing this group? He wasn't sure how to address this group, made up of the talented disciples of various sections. Our way of thinking is different from the masters, but we're still young and not strong enough, so we need each other's help. What's different? Facing the threat of the Snowy Kingdom, the human race has to unite and take the initiative to do something. We can't just cultivate in the deep mountains by ourselves. Bai Zhao said, even if we want to leave the human world, we have to stabilize it first. Otherwise, we'll be hiding from the world. So you're all believers of the Broadsword King, said Jingjiu. Bai Zhao said, no, we respect the Broadsword King, but we think he's working too hard. Without help, he can't achieve anything great. Jingjiu said, it makes sense, though he probably doesn't want to achieve anything great. Bai Zhao was taken aback. Thinking of the purpose of their visit, she said, in fact, we've been paying attention to you and Zhao Leu since a few years ago. But we didn't expect that for some reason. She was talking about the conflict between Jingjiu and the disciples of Liangwang Peak. Jingjiu understood what she meant, shaking his head. Bai Zhao thought he was afraid of something. So he said, the masters know about us. They probably want to see what we can do. Jingjiu said, this is the enlarged version of Liangwang Peak. You can understand it this way. I don't like Liangwang Peak, so I won't like you. We don't need to like each other. We just need to cooperate. There's no reason for the orthodox sects, especially between the Aoyama sect and our Zhongzhou school, to be hostile. Do you think we're just fighting for that? That's too boring. And this time, I have a feeling that someone wants to force us to attack Bulo Lin in advance and gain benefits from it. Bai Zhao's voice was soft, as if it was wrapped in the moist air of late spring. It was comfortable, sincere, and persuasive. Jingjiu thought her feeling was right. Then he thought of Lu Shui, who was missing now. I promise you that I won't do anything to Bulo Lin. Don't mention anything else. This was a clear refusal to the invitation of these geniuses of cultivation. Bai Zhao didn't show any disappointment, nor did she get angry. There's another thing, she said softly. For her, this was the main point of her visit to the Jing house tonight. Compared to it, the previous persuasion and solicitation were more like excuses. Please go ahead, said Jingjiu. Bai Zhao looked into his eyes and asked, are you and Zhao Leu cultivation partners? No, we don't have such an idea, replied Jingjiu. Bai Zhao stood up, stretched out her hands, and slowly turned around. The starlight passed through the window and fell on her. Her white dress was fluttering. It wasn't a dance, and her posture wasn't graceful, but it was extremely attractive. Chapter 168. Jingjiu looked at her and thought seriously for a while. Tonight was their first meeting. How should he evaluate her? Appearance had never been his focus, and in the previous conversation, the little girl had shown a good temperament in all aspects. The question is my opinion of you that important? It wasn't until he remembered that Bai Zhao first asked if he and Zhao Leu were cultivation companions that he understood her meaning. I don't think about these things. It has nothing to do with you, he said. This means that in your opinion, I'm not bad. Bai Zhao's eyes suddenly brightened, like a stream illuminated by the morning sunlight. I remember someone said that Lo Huainan and Tong Yin could become your cultivation companions, Jingjiu said. Big brother Luo is my father's disciple, and Tong Yin is my mother's disciple. My parents have their own ideas, but they're not my own. Bai Zhao explained softly. Why didn't you choose them? Jingjiu asked. No matter how he looked at it, Lo Huainan and Tong Yin were her best cultivation companions, unless Zhu Ruzhui or Guan Nanshan joined the competition. Because I don't like them, Bai Zhao said with a smile. Do you like me? Jingjiu suddenly felt that this matter was a bit troublesome, so he asked. It was ridiculous to say that they liked each other at their first meeting. Yes, Bai Zhao said with a sweet smile. What do you like? Jingjiu asked. I like your chess, Zhao said. Your chess is beautiful, even though you insist that chess is just a game, and it has nothing to do with beauty or ugliness. I probably won't play chess anymore, Jingju said. I heard that your talent in the way of the sword is the best in Aoyama, Zhao said. I like it very much. Jingju thought about it and said, I rarely use a sword. Zhao said, this time I gave up painting and joined calligraphy because I was inspired by your game of chess. I heard that you have a disciple in Aoyama who is also outstanding. Jingju was silent for a while and said, Gu Qing is right, but that's because he has a good temperament. It has nothing to do with me. Zhao said, I like your indifferent look the most. Maybe it's because I care about too many things and can't be like you, so I think you're very good. Jingju knew that it would be very difficult to change his lazy temperament. He thought about it and said, actually, I cultivate very hard. After being rejected 4 times in a row, Zhao was still not angry. He said softly, I like your appearance the most. Jingju didn't say anything. He couldn't use the thoughtless sword to cut a few wounds on his face. Zhao said, I'm congenitally deficient, and cultivation is very difficult. I look weak on the outside, but I've developed a straightforward temperament. I hope you won't think it rude. Jingju said, I understand. I'll also say very directly that it's impossible. Zhao left. Jingju picked up the cup of tea and walked to the window again, looking up at the night sky. The tea was still cold. After he said that, Zhao didn't say anything else. He just glanced at him. He didn't know how to describe that look in her eyes. Faint or leisurely, but he could read her eyes, because he had seen such a look many times in the past. It wasn't until he went into seclusion at Shinma Peak that he saw it less often. It was because he thought these looks were too troublesome for him when he stayed behind closed doors at Shinma Peak. Even now, he still avoided some places because of those looks like Qingrong Peak. He didn't expect to see such looks again at the plum meeting. Zhao was a young girl who lived passionately, contrary to her weak appearance. She was outstanding. It was admirable. What else could he do? All he could do was to find a way to avoid them, just like he had done before. The next morning, Jingju woke up on the bamboo chair. He remembered to bring the bamboo chair with him when he came out of the mountain, so he seldom slept on the bed. The sunlight shone on the begonia outside the window. The flowers had almost fallen off, but the greenness was even more exuberant, making the eyes feel comfortable. Jingju took down the iron sword from the bookshelf and called out the sword fire. He washed his face and left the Jing house. The disciples of Aoyama had been keeping an eye on the Jing house because they were worried that Jingju would do something reckless, and so were other forces. However, they didn't discover Jingju's departure. When Jingju wanted to disappear, nobody could sense his energy. It was the same as when the swordsmen of Bihu Peak wanted to kill Zhao Liu on the Sword Peak. In an ordinary house, in an ordinary alley, Jingju pushed open the courtyard door and entered. He saw 2 chickens looking for food on the ground with their heads lowered. The 2 chickens were very skinny. The chaff on the ground and the cabbage moss with only dead leaves left showed that they had a poor diet. Jingju glanced around the small courtyard and walked into the room. He looked at the man sleeping on the table and asked, Who asked you to do this? Sure, Fengshen wasn't as bored as he had been in the last 2 days. He had been searching everywhere outside Jiaoga City because of the assassination of Zhao Liu, and he was busy reading the files when he came back to the city. He came back home late last night. He read the files a few more times and fell asleep unknowingly. Hearing the sound, he lifted his head from the table and rubbed his tired eyes. The blurry image became clearer, turning into a tall figure. Then he saw the unforgettable face, and he woke up instantly, as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over him. The case in the Mingzue Valley had aroused much speculation and discussion. The murderer had been identified as Wei Qinzi, an elder in the Yuanying state of Zhongzhou School. Then who was the mastermind behind this? Royal concubine who had been suspected the most so far. Everybody knew that she had a grudge against Zhao Liu, and it could even be said that it was an unresolvable grudge. Besides, she had a good relationship with Zhongzhou school. Given her status in the royal palace, it was possible for her to persuade the elder in the Yuanying state of Zhongzhou school. Few people had already confirmed that Wei Qinzi was the assassin of Bilo Lin. But who had asked Bilo Lin to do this? Because of the remnants of the soul fires in the wild forest of the Mingcue Valley, many people suspected that this was a plot of the underworld. The underworld might have intended to use this incident to provoke a conflict between the two leaders of the orthodox sects in Chaotian in order to gain some benefits. But these were only conjectures, because there was no evidence. The truth was like the sky covered by a great deal of fog. One knew it was there, but couldn't see it. Nobody associated Shi Fengshan with the mastermind of this assassination. Though he had led the highly achieved swordsmen of the Pure Heaven Bureau to pursue Zhao Leiyu and Jingjiu for a long time, and though he had said some harsh words to Zhao Leiyu at the Four Seas banquet in front of so many cultivation practitioners, he was an official, and an official of the imperial court. Of course he had to say those words. How could such a marginalized official of the Pure Heaven Bureau have the ability to threaten the Aoyama sect? How could he be qualified to do such a big thing? He used the word official, but not the word daring. Nobody suspected Shi Fengshan. But Jingjiu came to his home and asked him this question. Chapter 169. Shi Fengshan squinted his eyes and said to him, "I don't know what you are talking about." He didn't understand why the other party was so sure that he was involved in this matter. "Last night, I calculated all kinds of possibilities, but I couldn't get an accurate result because of a certain variable," Jingjiu said, "but I think you should be involved in this matter." Shi Fengshan squinted his eyes even more and said with a mocking tone, "How can you barge in and question me, an official of the imperial court? How can you make a decision based on mere speculation? Does a mortal master Jingjiu also play chess like this?" "Yes," Jingjiu said. Shi Fengshan sneered, but didn't say anything. Jingjiu said, "It's not speculation anymore. Your breathing, heartbeat, voice, and other reactions all indicate that you are involved in this matter." Shi Fengshan's pupil shrank. "Including this reaction," Jingjiu said. It was very quiet in the small courtyard. Two skinny chickens crowed once in a while, but their clucking sounds were very listless. Shi Fengshan remained silent for a long time. Then he stood up from behind the table, tidied up his official robe, and said, "Yes, I am the mastermind of this matter." His tone was very indifferent, and his expression was much calmer. Without waiting for Jingjiu to ask more questions, he said directly, "The assassin of Bilo Lin was hired by me. The middleman was in a small tavern, but he should have escaped by now. If there is anything unexpected, it is that I didn't expect the assassin of Bilo Lin to be an elder of Zhongzhou school. I'm pretty sure that this wasn't the intention of Zhongzhou school. I even started to suspect that I was used by Bilo Lin. You should understand what I mean. Even the most cowardly of criminals would not be able to explain their problems so neatly." Shi Fengshan's calmness gave off a weird feeling. Jingjiu didn't feel anything because he didn't care. He said, "You are still worried about the internal strife of the orthodox sects and the instability of the imperial court. It seems that you are a loyal official." "Not really. I just don't want to implicate too many innocent people." Shi Fengshan raised his head and said proudly, "I am different from you. Though we are all cultivators, I have never practiced the heartless path." Jingjiu didn't pay attention to what he was trying to convey through his gestures, saying, "Tell me the person who instigated you." Shi Fengshan sneered, "There's no mastermind. It's just that I want her dead, and you know it very well. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to me." Jingjiu said, "If Wei Chunzi is Bilo Lin's man, you won't be able to invite him." Shi Fengshan's expression changed slightly, but soon returned to normal, remaining silent. Jingjiu said, "I know it's Jing Xin." Shi Fengshan's sleeves trembled slightly. He did not understand how the other party could say the answer with such certainty. You don't have any proof. Even if you know the soul-searching technique of the deviant sects, you can only get nonsense, which can't be accepted. He looked at Jingjio and said with a stern expression, "Even if the scene just now was recorded by the retrograde pearl of the Aoyama sect, it still can't be accepted because there's no sound in the world. Only the retrieved heavenly pearl of the Zhongzhou school could have the ability to perfectly record the scene and sound. Such a treasure couldn't be in the hands of a young disciple of the Aoyama sect." Jingjio said, "So you don't worry because you don't have any proof." Shifeng said, "That's right." Jingjio said, "I don't need proof to do things." Shifeng said after a moment of silence, "You cultivators have always been like this. I'm not surprised." Jingjio took a step forward. Shifeng said, "It looks like I'm going to die for sure. Before I die, do you want to know why I only want Zhao Leia dead, but I've never worried about you? Last night, in front of the Zhao Manor house, when Shui Yu Nunnery and M.O., she said something similar. Jingjio didn't listen, but he stopped walking today. It's because I've studied you, and I've found that you are different from Zhao Leiyu. You have no interest in this world, and you're extremely indifferent." Shifeng said, "Most people might think that people like you are heartless, but only the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau like us know that a cultivation practitioner like you is not harmful to the world. But Zhao Leiyu is different. She is still full of passion and love for this world, and she thinks she can change it." Jingjio understood what he meant, and then thought of those young people mentioned by Zhao last night, saying, "There are many young cultivation practitioners like her." Shifeng said, "That's right, but those young cultivation practitioners are not as easy to kill as she is." Jingjio didn't say anything. "I'm wary of the cultivation practitioners, because your strength is too great. Any random move of yours could be a disaster for the mortals." Shifeng stared into his eyes and said, "Zhao Leiyu is not afraid of killing people, and she will kill people at all costs to practice her Tao. This is the biggest disaster." If he was the one being criticized, Jingjio wouldn't pay any attention to it. But it was Zhao Leiyu who was being criticized, so he wanted to say a few words on her behalf. All the people Zhao Leiyu killed were evil people. Shifeng sneered, "Let's not talk about whether the standard of good and evil should be determined by you cultivation practitioners. Even if all the people she killed were evil people and demons, is that considered a good deed? Back when you and Zhao Leiyu killed a few thugs of a brothel in Shangzhou, I've already figured out why you did it." A cultivation practitioner with a high status waved his hand while passing by. "And you changed the miserable life of an ordinary person? Do you think you can save that little girl by doing that? Do you know what kind of miserable life that little girl is living now? It's not a good deed. It's just to satisfy your desire to save the world. Hypocritical, disgusting." Jingjio said calmly, "Yes, I told her that at the time. What about you? Did you do anything after you learned about it?" The smile on Shifeng's face faded away. Jingjio said, "If you did something, that little girl should thank you. If not, you shouldn't be blamed, just like Zhao Liu." Shifeng said after a long silence, "Maybe you're right. I'm just too afraid of her." "What are you afraid of?" asked Jingjio. "I'm afraid that she will become the second Taiping Zhenren." Shifeng said in a trembling voice, "You probably don't understand why I said that. All you need to know is it's too miserable. The human world is too miserable." Jingjio fell silent. Of course he knew that. Back then, no one in the human world heard the war drums. Peace. Only peace remained. Complete silence. It was extremely dreadful. Last night, Zhao said that she had a feeling that someone wanted to assassinate Zhao Leiyu to force the Orthodox sects to attack Bulo Lin in advance, and then gain some benefits from it. Compared to Shifeng's worry that Bulo Lin wanted to instigate a war between the two leading Orthodox sects by assassinating Zhao Leiyu, this was a more far-fetched thought. But she could only think of the underworld because of the existence of the soul fire. But Jingjio thought even further, putting his sight directly between the human race and the underworld. It was because he was familiar with this smell. It was the smell of a silent conspiracy that could kill thousands of people. It was what someone was best at. Today, he came directly to Shifeng's house, trying to find some traces. When Shifeng asked him to say his last words, He listened in silence for the same reason. But up until now, Shi Fengchun hadn't mentioned that person, not even the words related to it. He stared into Shi Fengchun's eyes and said, "Did anything different happen before and after you had this thought?" Shi Fengchun shook his head, revealing a smile on his face, saying, "I only hope that there will be a different world in the future." Having said that, he sat back on the chair. Several streams of black blood flowed out from his eyes and nostrils. He stopped breathing. He had broken his meridians, and at the same time, chewed the poison that he had hidden. Looking at the corpse on the chair, Jing Jiao remained silent for a while, then turned around and left the room. Chapter 170. Thank you, book friend 201-71025. I can't remember the comments after that. The original text of those few sentences is Lu Xun's prose poem. In such a situation, no one hears the battle cry. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you. Jing Jiao could have stopped Shi Fengchun's suicide, but he didn't. It wasn't because it was unnecessary, but because he saw the will to die in Shi Fengchun's eyes when he said the last sentence. He understood Shi Fengchun's anger and hatred towards the cultivation practitioners, though he didn't sympathize with him. He didn't want to ask about the painful past of Shi Fengchun's life. Life and death were the most important. He would respect it, then let the dead get what they deserve. The small courtyard was quiet. The sunlight moved away. Two skinny chickens pecked at the shadows on the ground weakly. The courtyard door was pushed open again. "Master, it's still cabbage moss stir-fried with bacon today." Wang Xiaoming limped in and put the bacon on the grinding table. He kicked the two skinny chickens into the cage to prevent them from pecking at the bacon. Last time he said the cabbage moss was a bit old. This time it's very tender. He carried the cabbage moss into the room excitedly, wanting to let his master have a look first. There was a light clap. The cabbage moss fell on the ground and spread out like a real flower. His legs trembled uncontrollably. "Ah, master!" Miserable cries came from the room. His cries were unpleasant. His cries were not pleasant at all. Shi Fengchun's funeral was very quiet, at least at the beginning. Wang Xiaoming knelt in front of the hall, throwing paper money into the basin. His movements were mechanical, and his expression was numb. His eyes were bloodshot. Perhaps it was because of the smoke or because he had been crying for too long. The neighbors came and left. He was the only one left kneeling in the small courtyard. Suddenly, shouts and other noises came from outside the courtyard. Then, the wooden door was pushed open roughly. It wasn't someone looking for trouble, but some lords were coming to offer their condolences. The yamen runners who were informed hurried over to clear the place. The white banners were held high, and the words were written in ink. The atmosphere in the small courtyard suddenly changed. Wang Xiaoming ignored him and continued to kneel in front of the copper basin, burning the paper money in a daze. He couldn't remember the official positions and names of the officials who appeared after him. When Shi Fengchun was alive, his house was deserted, but after his death, it was crowded. Everyone knew why. Wang Xiaoming also knew that. Nobody saw how Shi Fengchun died, and the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau confirmed that he committed suicide after the investigation. But who forced him to commit suicide? All the spearheads were pointed at Aoyama's sect, or more accurately, at Jing Jiao. The officials of the imperial court who were deeply influenced by the Zhongzhou school would of course use this opportunity to pressure the Aoyama sect. The so-called mourning. How could there be any sorrow on the faces of the officials? In Wang Xiaoming's eyes, the only person who had a genuine affection for him was the royal concubine who had indirectly caused the death of his master. Late at night, the royal concubine who sent someone to deliver a large sum of gold and silver to Jing Jiao. Wang Xiaoming thanked him. After Shi Fengchun was buried, Wang Xiaoming left Zhaoga City. No one knew where he had gone. His colleagues in the warehouse of the Pure Heaven Bureau would talk about this youth once in a while. A colleague named 72, who had a good relationship with him, said when asked, he said he wanted to go back to the Northwest, and that his hometown is there. In fact, he also felt it strange because he had never heard that Wang Xiaoming had a hometown in the last 2 years, and had no idea what relationship it had with the Northwest. It was quiet in the back garden of the Zhao Manor house. The trees in the late spring were at the most luxuriant and not boring stage, which made people feel happy just by looking at them. Yet, Zhao Lei wasn't in such a mood. Shi Fengshan has an adopted son named Wang Xiaoming, who has the potential for cultivation. He left Zhaoga City today, and his whereabouts are unknown. Glancing at her once, Jingzhou wondered if she intended to eliminate the source of the trouble. Like I said, I'm not a good person, and I'm very vicious. Her face was a bit pale because she had been wounded in the Mingsue Valley that day. Jingzhou said, Shi Fengshan wasn't wrong in his judgment. It has something to do with me not being a good teacher. Your killing intent is indeed strong. Do you care? Asked Zhao Lei while staring at Jingzhou. Jingzhou shook his head, saying, You're angry because you haven't figured it out yet. After a moment of silence, Zhao Lei said, Yes, I don't understand why he wants to kill me. Did I do something wrong? Jingzhou said, The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility, and correspondingly, the greater the danger. Your temperament is unrestrained, and you care about the people in the world. As such, you're the most dangerous person in his eyes, and he has to eliminate you before you are powerful enough. Zhao Lei still didn't understand, asking, Is it better to hide in the hermit peaks and cultivate the unfeeling Tao, ignoring the lives of the people? Jingzhou said, In a sense, the cultivation practitioners who don't care about anything in the world are safer for the mortals. Zhao Lei fell silent. She had lived in Zhaoga City since her childhood, and all she thought about was cultivation, but she had also read some miscellaneous books. In those stories, there were talented scholars and beautiful women, some chivalrous and righteous, and some hot-blooded warriors for the state. Later, when she went to the Aoyama sect, the sect rules stated that the cultivation practitioners should help the people in need, but during the journey of tens of thousands of miles, and until now, Jingzhou's attitude was that the cultivation practitioners should not care about the mortal affairs. Why? The cultivation practitioners and the mortals are from two different worlds. Once the mortals can cultivate, they have nothing to do with the mortals. A poet of the previous dynasty wrote a poem called Sleepwalking in the Cold Mountain, which was loved by the mortals, but the cultivation practitioners didn't feel much about it. They preferred his poem 3,000 Feet of White Hair. Why? Jingzhou said, It's because the latter is about the bitterness of life and death, and the cultivation practitioners still can't get rid of it, so they feel the same way. The former is about the affairs of the immortals. You and I are immortals to begin with, so we can see the sceneries that mortals can't and experience the feelings that mortals can't. How can we be moved by the imaginary sceneries and feelings of mortals? After a long moment of silence, Zhao Lei said, But the mortals can also pursue it. Jingzhou said, Yes, the mortals can choose not to accept their fate and try their best to embark on the path of immortality. But not all mortals have such a good fortune. There was a temple on the mountain outside Zhaoga City. Few people came to offer incense outside Zhaoga City, since it was not the festival season. Wang Xiaoming walked to the back of the temple and climbed up a tree with some difficulty. After making sure that nobody was around the forest, he took out an oiled paper bag from the inside of his clothes. The bag contained some miscellaneous items, which meant a lot to him. The items were the banknotes and a thin book sent by the royal concubine Hu. The book had the words Qingxin Method written on it, which was the entry-level method of the Three Purities sect. It was a relic left by Shi Fengshan for him. He opened the book and began to read it carefully, but he still couldn't understand the words after a long time. Chapter 171. Zhao Lei had been preparing to cultivate since she was a child. She lived in seclusion until she went to Aoyama. The only people she came into contact with were her family and servants. She had never thought about these problems. This is the first time I've said these things to anyone. It's boring and meaningless, so it will be the last time. Jingzhou looked at her and said calmly, Monsters eat people, and so do cultivation practitioners. Some of them really eat people, and some of them pretend to eat people, but they all eat. Zhao Liu was silent for a while, then said, like those pearl fishermen you mentioned in Haijiao? But there are differences between the two. Jing Jiao said, in the final analysis, cultivation sects need the support of mortals, but what have cultivation practitioners done for mortals? Zhao Liu raised her eyebrows and said, we've all walked the heavenly bridge in Nanhezu. Jing Jiao said, that's right. Cultivation practitioners can build bridges and open mountains for mortals and slay monsters and devils. But compared to their ability, what they've done is still too little. It's because cultivation is about cultivating oneself. Take our Aoyama sect, for example. If it weren't for the fact that we don't have the opportunity to break through the state, those second-generation disciples wouldn't even be willing to be the outer sect masters, let alone travel the world and get rid of misfortunes and troubles. You mean the attitude of cultivators towards mortals is like raising sheep? Zhao Liu stared in his eyes and said, building bridges is just to help them make the sheep pen stronger, and slaying monsters is just to prevent wolves from eating too many of their own sheep. Jing Jiao said, it's a good metaphor, but not accurate enough. Cultivation practitioners also come from the mortals, and a relationship between them is countless times more complicated than that between herdsmen and sheep. Zhao Liu asked, what kind of problems will this bring? Sheep won't envy herdsmen, because no sheep will become herdsmen. Jing Jiao said, but mortals will envy cultivation practitioners, because their former companions have become cultivation practitioners. Zhao Liu understood what he meant and asked, how do we solve this problem? Jing Jiao said, the swordsmen have everything. As such, Chaotian has always been governed by the cultivation practitioners, and the current situation is the same. The royal family of the Jing family is merely the administrator elected by all the major cultivation sects based on the balance of power and many other considerations. Of course, the royal family of the Jing family will make use of this balance to strengthen themselves and plan for the future. Zhao Liu seemed to have understood something, saying, so it started from the plum meeting. That's right. Back then, it was the plum meeting that determined the situation of Chaotian for the next few hundred years. However, some cultivation practitioners had a different idea after the meeting. Jing Jiao said, they think that this kind of situation is too stable and inefficient, and that the human race improves too slowly to truly eliminate the threat of the Snowy Kingdom. What are they going to do then? Zhao Liu asked curiously. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao said, they think that the human race shouldn't live too comfortably, at least not before the Snowy Kingdom is eliminated. They also think that the mortals shouldn't be given too much consideration, and that the cultivation practitioners should tear off their hypocritical masks and directly enslave the mortals. At the same time, they should select the mortals with the potential for cultivation and use all kinds of methods to stimulate their growth and strengthen the human race. A surprised expression showed in Zhao Liu's black eyes as she asked, is it like raising sheep? Jing Jiao didn't say anything. Shihuan Mountain was located to the west of Zhaoge City, 1,700 miles. This place happened to be outside the range of the Great Formation of Cloud Dream Mountain. The fog was everywhere on the cliff. As the morning sun rose, the fog rose up, and the scenery in front of the cliff became clearer. A young man sat by the cliff's edge, holding a bamboo stick in his hand. The line hanging from the tip of the stick dropped down to the bottom of the cliff and into a waterfall. The water was rumbling, and the waterfall was moving fast, but the thin line was steady and motionless. That day he was fishing for birds in the clouds. What was he fishing for in the waterfall today? Some very thin black shadows could be vaguely seen swimming in the waterfall at a very fast speed. They could swim freely in the seemingly vertical curtain of water. It was unknown what kind of strange fish they were. Those black shadows were staring at the front of the thin line. They knew that it was dangerous, but they refused to leave. It seemed that they were also a very greedy species. The thin and short old man squatted beside the young man, rubbing his red nose from time to time. He really looked like a dog. The young man suddenly raised his head and looked at a cliff more than 10 miles away. The old man followed his gaze. With his eyesight, he could naturally see a lame lad climbing up the mountain with difficulty while carrying a backpack on his back. He's different from Lu Shisui. The fire in Lu Shisui's heart is fake, but he really hates. Those lousy cultivation methods of the Three Purity sect are not worth learning. The young man glanced at the old man and said, "How about we let him become the Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect?" The old man said, "Interesting. Anyway, my disciples and grand disciples have never been filial to me, and they have never thought of helping me, the great ancestor, to solve my troubles. They all deserve to die." The young man inserted the bamboo stick into a crack in the cliff, stood up, and looked into the distance. The moment his hand left the bamboo stick, those thin shadows in the waterfall rushed toward the end of the line like countless black lightning bolts. Countless splashes were stirred up, mixed with ear-piercing screams. The young man paid no attention to them. Looking at the other side, he suddenly said, "Do you think we should let him jump off the cliff and find a cave, or fall into the lake and find a treasure chest?" The old man said with a smile, "I think either way is fine." The young man suddenly asked, "Do you really want to kill me?" The old man's expression remained the same, and he didn't say anything. The young man turned around and looked at him, still wearing an amiable smile on his handsome face. The old man was silent for a while, then said, "I don't want to hide it from you, because it's meaningless, and I can't hide it anyway. Yes, I do want to kill you today." The young man asked, "Why?" "My disciples and grand disciples haven't been filial to me because they don't know where I'm hiding. They can't help me solve this big problem because they can't defeat your Aoyama. But that doesn't mean they don't love and respect me. Every year, when we worship our ancestors, my portrait will be placed in the third place." The old man said with a sneer, "My sect has been suppressed by you righteous sects for thousands of years, living like dogs. Finally, there is some hope in recent years. As the great ancestor, of course I want to do something for the sect. But now you wanted to teach the technique to this cripple that I don't know. Do you think I have any reason not to be angry?" "Yes, I heard that the young master of the mysterious dark sect is quite good. I think you want to teach him the technique," the young man said with a smile. "But I think it's very interesting, so it's decided." The old man narrowed his eyes and said nothing more. Of course, he wanted to kill this young man and gain true freedom. But he didn't do it because he had his reasons. The young man sighed and reached out to touch the old man's head. His eyes were full of pity. Pity was not sympathy, it was more condescending. The old man was a famous great devil in the history of cultivation, one of the famous hidden swordsmen, the third Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect, who was qualified to pity him, or Chapter 172. The short and skinny old man narrowed his eyes and looked at the lame youth who was still climbing up the mountain. He didn't seem to care about being touched and pitied by the young man. For a great devil of his realm and age, who knew how shrewd he was, how could he be easily disturbed by external things? He could not kill the young man beside him because the young man's soul was connected to something, and that thing could prevent him from being discovered by the Aoyamasor formation. Of course, these were all said by young people, so it was highly possible that they were lying. However, he was unable to determine whether it was true or false. He did not dare to gamble because he was gambling with his life and death. The young man turned to look at the youth in the distant mountains and suddenly asked a question. Is death really that scary? Look, he could fall off the cliff at any time and break his bones, but he's still climbing up. That's because he's too young and hasn't seriously and calmly considered the issue of life and death. The old man said if he could really become the sect master of the mysterious dark sect and unify the devil path in a few hundred years, do you think he would still have the courage he has now? The young man said, Chow Yuan faced the test of life and death every day in the wind and snow, but he didn't have any intention of avoiding it. That's a Buddha, not a human. A Buddha is always ready to die, but a human is greedy for eternal life. That's why he isn't afraid, but I am. The old man narrowed his eyes and said, apart from the three of us, those old guys hiding in Aoyama and Cloud Dream Mountain are also afraid of death, so it's not shameful." The young man said, "The longer one lives, the more one fears death. I've heard this saying many times, but it still makes sense." The old man said, "It should be said that the more you can live, the more you are afraid of death. Therefore, if Jinren Jingyang is still alive, then he is the most afraid of death in the world." The young man fell silent. His gaze fell on a distant place, on the thin layer of clouds that connected heaven and earth. His expression was somewhat lonely. The old man looked at his profile and said with a frown, "What I don't understand is that you are also very good at living, but why do you seem to not fear the end? Because living at the bottom of a well is very boring. Even if I can live for tens of thousands of years like the round turtle, what's the point?" The young man said, "Little White was very interesting in the past. Now it's acting like a king on Bihu Peak. I don't want to be like it." In the late spring, the rain in Jiaoga City had gradually lessened. Whether it was the black eaves of Taichung Temple or the roof corridors of the Zhao Mansion, reflecting the gradually blazing sunlight, they were all warm enough to make people want to sleep. Zhao Leiyu's face was pale, but her eyes were clear and focused. Jing Jiao had made it very clear that this would be the last time he would discuss this issue. Coexistence or rearing sheep are the thoughts of cultivators. Mortals can't cultivate, but their wisdom is no less than ours. Of course, they have their own thoughts. For example, the officials of the Precious Tree House or the Imperial Court will actively participate in this world in order to obtain money or power and enjoy a better life in their short lives. Jing Jiao said, "Sure, Fengshen couldn't go far on the path of cultivation because of his innate talent and some other reasons. Maybe it was because of something he had experienced in his childhood that he was hostile to cultivation practitioners. He was full of suspicion and hatred, which could represent the attitude of some other mortals." After a moment of silence, Zhao Leiyu asked, "Are there many people with such an attitude?" Jing Jiao said, "For tens of thousands of years, the cultivation practitioners have never stopped bullying and oppressing the mortals. The imperial court of the Jing family should be considered the best era, but they still couldn't solve this problem. Of course, the mortals can't resist. As long as they can survive, they don't dare show any disrespect to the cultivation practitioners on the surface, and they don't dare show their hostility. However, the anger doesn't exist. It is hidden in the deepest part of their souls. Once the cultivation practitioners lose their power, the anger will erupt and become an unimaginable torrent, destroying everything they're used to." On the ocean outside Haizhou City, the hurricane had just passed. A huge shadow swept over the surface of the ocean, bringing up a gust of wind and waves. The fishermen didn't need to raise their heads to know that it was a flying whale. A boat couldn't withstand the enormous force of heaven and earth, capsizing tragically. Though some fishing boats came to rescue them from afar, 2 sea girls were killed. The corpses of the sea girls were wrapped in cloth and slowly sank to the surface of the ocean. The singing of the mermaids could be vaguely heard amidst the distant waves. Everybody knew that the corpses of the 2 sea girls couldn't sink to the bottom of the ocean because they would be torn apart and eaten by the vicious creatures in the ocean. But the fishermen were numb to it because this kind of thing would happen every once in a while, and they were used to it. Everybody knew that fishing for the source beads was the most profitable business, but few fishermen were willing to do it because it was too dangerous. Yet, the number of source beads collected by the Western Sea Sword School on behalf of the Imperial Court was so high that someone had to do it. There was a gambling house hidden in a manor outside Jiaoga City. In the early morning, a middle-aged man walked out of the gambling house, sweating profusely. His body reeked of sweat, and it was unclear how many days and nights he had stayed in the gambling house. Judging from his expression and bloodshot eyes, he must have lost all his money. He walked to a tree, untied his belt, and started urinating. A flash of sword light suddenly flashed in the dim morning light, disappearing without a trace in an instant. The middle-aged man happened to see the scene, trembling in fear. His expression was a bit bewildered. He had been lucky enough to see the sword light in the sky when he was a child. At the time, he was still a child, and he felt a great deal of admiration and admiration, making up his mind that he would work hard to become a legendary immortal master. But he had changed his mind a long time ago. He spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground and cursed at the sky. "You will die if you fall to the ground. You will die if you fall to the ground." The clouds and fog of Aoyama poured into the small town, and the peach blossoms were blooming everywhere, creating a picturesque scene. A haggard young man knelt on the street, kowtowing to the faintly discernible peaks in the clouds and fog. Behind him was a dilapidated handcart on which an old man lay. It was the middle of spring, and it was warmer in the south, but the old man was covered with 2 thick quilts. His face was still pale, and he was trembling incessantly, showing that he was afraid of the cold. What was more alarming was that the old man's breathing was extremely weak, as if he was on the verge of dying. A resident said sympathetically, "The immortal masters live in the deep mountains, so they can't see you. What's the use even if you hurt your head by kowtowing? Hurry up and go to the Guocheng temple. Machio is too far away. My father really can't hold on. So," the young man said with a trembling voice, "I heard that the immortal masters of Oyama's sect are the most benevolent, and they often patrol around. What if they come today?" The person sighed. "The immortal pills are so precious. How can they give them to you so easily? Moreover, the world is peaceful now, and it's not like the time when the immortal of Jingyang ascended a few years ago. Immortal masters can be seen patrolling the town every few days, but I haven't seen a sword light for half a year. You should give up on this idea." The young man looked at the peaks and the clouds, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. With the help of the resident, he stood up with difficulty and dragged the handcart out of the town. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.